Hey guys, it's Aidan from Kino, Inferno, the podcast you're listening to, so you probably know that. Before we get into our long-awaited Batman special, we thought it was worth doing another little, I say another, we've only done one previously for Ivan Reitman, but we thought it was worth doing a little shout-out to somebody famous who passed away a couple of weeks ago, comic book artist Neil Adams, who we'd like to take the time to dedicate this episode to. Obviously, if there are any other comic book nerds in the audience, you'll know Neil Adams is primarily remembered among Bat fans for his run as an artist in the 70s with writer Dennis O'Neil, which basically reinvented the character, introduced a lot of elements that are super influential now. He's generally considered to be one of the best artists, or if not the best artist to ever work on the Caped Crusader's adventures. That run is legendary. It's the run where you get the introduction of like Ra's al Ghul and Talia al Ghul, and it's a really cool little influential few years of Batman's history. They kind of take him away from the sort of comics code, kidified Batman, and kind of start pushing him back towards the kind of pulpier, more mysterious character that he was before. They also introduce a lot of interesting elements like what Grant Morrison likes to refer to as shirtless love god Batman, where suddenly he's always appearing with his big buff hairy chest out, and he's always kind of going on Bondian globe-trotting adventures. So that's just read the Adams O'Neil run. It's great, and it has some of the best art to ever be in a popular comic book, courtesy of Mr. Adams. The other thing that I'd like to shout out for Adams in particular is his dedication to creators' rights. If you know anything about comic books, you'll know that the comic book industry in general, and the big two, DC and Marvel in particular, are not necessarily the best when it comes to giving creators their dues. And Neil Adams was a lifelong campaigner of creators' rights, in fact. And he campaigned for a long time to bring about changes to the sort of general business practices of the comic industry, and was successful in a lot of ways. Most notably, or the big headline thing that he was partially responsible for, set into motion, was Joe Siegel and Jerry Schuster, the creators of Superman, finally getting paid their dues, finally their estates at any rate getting the money they deserved. So, all in all, a great guy, a magnificent artist, and someone who, seems like our kind of dude. A solid, cool dude. So yeah, this episode is dedicated to him and his legacy. Hello, listeners.
Hello.
Welcome back to Kino Inferno, your favourite movie podcast.
It's getting very sexy in here. What's going on?
I'm Aidan.
And I'm Marc.
And we're here to talk today about Batman. If we sound a little bit unhinged, listeners, it's because this episode has been, would you say cursed?
I would definitely say cursed. Yeah, I'm
cursed.
I'm very apprehensive to keep recording at this point.
Yeah, me too. As if you're on the Facebook page, we've actually recorded this episode once before, but unfortunately, as we were recording, the Joker interrupted the broadcast to do terrorism. So
Love that Joker.
Love that Joker. So we've had to re-record. So if we sound a little bit like we're sick of hearing the word Batman, then we are. Because, full disclosure, we had some technical issues when we were recording the first one anyway. So on the day, we re-recorded several segments.
And I just want to say, I never in a million years ever thought that I would get tired of saying Batman, but here we are. So
yes,
let's do this. So it's probably worth jumping into our relationship with Batman, I would say. I think that's probably the best way to sort of kick this off. So, Aidan, please tell me about your relationship with the Bat. Like, do you love the Bat? I assume you love the Bat. I know you love the Bat.
The Batty.
You do love the Batty, you Batty man. Can I say
that?
Yeah, well, I can say that.
I don't know. It seems... I don't know. We shouldn't. Let's move on. Well, as you know from the last episode, the last time we tried to record this episode, I'm partial to a bit of Batty. I'm a big fan of the Batman. Multiple incarnations across the years, obviously. I think my kind of earliest abiding memory of the Batman, probably same as yourself, really, is the 90s cartoon series, Batman, the animated series.
Yes.
Now
absolutely.
Rightfully regarded as a classic. And I would say probably the best adaptation ever, if not the best version of Batman.
I think I would agree with you. I think I would say, to my mind at least, I think it is the most definitive adaptation of Batman, and whenever I think of anything Batman related, it's typically the animated series that springs to mind, like their version of characters and such. Like, that's very much ingrained in my brain. Yeah.
And I had all the movies we're going to talk about today on VHS, the Burton Schumacher movies.
And for the kids amongst us, VHS were these really shit quality tapes that you had of movies.
Yes, they were like cassette tapes for film, but you don't know what cassette... Okay. They were these rectangular objects which contained reels of videotape that would play from the left to the right. And when placed into a VHS player, would convert that into a televisual image that you could watch. That would get gradually more distressed over time if you watched the video fairly frequently.
And as a kid, it was like magic, but I don't know if you've watched a VHS in recent years. A couple of years ago, I ended up watching something. I think it was Power Rangers. I think it was the Power Rangers movie I saw on VHS for some unknown reason. Probably drugs. We ended up watching the first Power Rangers movie on a VHS, and... I looked at it, and my initial response was, how the fuck did we used to watch these? Because,
yes,
I mean, admittedly, this tape's probably aged, but my god, the quality is just bad. It's so bad.
It would be like, lower than standard definition on a DVD.
Yeah, absolutely. And
generally pan and scan, so not even in the right format most of the time.
Just terrible. But a source of great joy and nostalgia for me is VHS tapes.
Yeah, you have to fast forward through the adverts. Because there'd always be commercials at the start of the VHS.
I always remember as well the first time we got a DVD in my house. We got a DVD player, and we got the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie. That was the first DVD I ever owned. And I remember being amazed by when you hit pause on the DVD, the image was clear. Which was mind-blowing to me. Whereas,
because for Generation Z listeners... when you pause a VHS, the image kind of goes a bit black and white from what I remember. It just kind of
it's very distorted.
Yeah, the three lines would come up on the screen like as it just held the tape in place.
And it was really shit if you wanted to pause for a specific moment to see something because you weren't guaranteed to see it.
Yeah.
It was potluck. But enough about relics of the past.
There's a big movement now for collecting VHSs. In the same way that people collected vinyls.
And VHSs are still released. I know that for a fact because, of course, this was advertised to me. But a company just re-released the sequels to Sleepaway Camp on VHS.
Nice.
And
I think A24 have released a few VHSs, some of their horror movies.
I believe they have, yeah. I mean, I know the only reason why the Sleepaway Camp movies were re-released on VHS is because the original gore footage for the third movie is only available in VHS format. So they just released a VHS so it can finally be released uncut. And as you can imagine, that is now worth a fair bit of money.
Something that only Marc cares about.
Sleepaway
Camp being released on VHS.
I love those movies, what can I say? But not as much as I love Batman, because I fucking love Batman.
So, we're both in the same boat here. We're talking about our relationship to Batman. Long, storied obsession. I mean, I don't know how deep you go into comics and stuff.
Not huge. I mean, you know me, I'm not really a huge comic book guy, but if you were to look at my bookshelf in my house, which I don't think you can see because me and Aidan can see each other right now, there is an entire shelf which is just, well, I say just Batman comics. It's like 90% Batman comics and a couple of Buffy comics, and that's pretty much all I own.
And several issues of FHM.
Yeah, and nuts as well, unloaded. You know, I've got a real thing for collecting lads mags of the early 2000s. I feel like one day they might be worth something.
FHM's still going, I think.
Is
Nuts
it?
and Zoo have gone by the
Nuts and
wayside.
Zoo are confined to the past where they belong. Although
I'll tell you
both
what,
publications did give Crank High Voltage 5 stars from what I gather, so...
Yeah, well, as we know. One thing I did see in a newsagent that I wasn't expecting, talk about a blast from the past, an issue of Front magazine.
Oh, they still make that?
I guess they do, unless this person just had back issues that they were putting on the aisles.
I didn't even know newsagents still existed.
Yeah, well, you forget. You might be living your city slicker lifestyle down there on the mean streets of Lincoln. Oh, I work in a gaming bar. Oh, I'm out here keeping it real.
Yeah, you just live in the sticks, mate. That's all that is. Little country bumpkin you are, mate.
All right. Roads blocked again. Tractor's broken down. Oh dear. Anyway,
we both love the Bat. We both do love the Bat. Yes. I mean, I've loved Batman since I was a kid, and I like a lot of the comics. And I know you're much more into that kind of thing than what I am.
Yeah, I'm a true fan.
But we must address the elephant in the room. Not that I'm not even touching that true fan bullshit. We must address the elephant in the room, which is the reason why we are doing an Aidan and Marc versus episode, because there's always a reason. Because we did the Ghostbusters one because Afterlife came out. We did the Scream one because of 5 Cream. We did the Wallace and Gromit one because
they announced they're making a new Wallace and Gromit film at some point in the future. So we're just riding that press high.
Because we have very little inspiration otherwise. So the reason why we're doing this Aidan and Marc versus Batman episode is because just recently Matt Reeves released The Batman, which is the latest Batman cinematic incarnation.
Matt Reeves of Cloverfield and Let Me In and the Apes movies.
2 of the Apes movies. He didn't do the first one. He did Dawn and War, which are the 2 better ones, admittedly.
Yeah, I like Rise of the Planet of the Apes, but Rise of the Planet of the Apes kind of feels like a first act stretched out across a feature-length movie.
Yeah, I enjoy it because I recently watched the 3 Apes movies for the first time, and the first one is a good watch, but tonally it is all over the place. Like that movie doesn't really know what it wants to be. Still a good time. I enjoyed it. But Dawn is fantastic. Like, that's genuinely a really great little movie.
Yeah, Dawn is the best one.
And then War is also good, but it very much exists in the shadow of Dawn, I think.
Yeah, but this isn't the Planet of the Apes podcast. This is the Bateman podcast.
We are never doing an Aidan and Marc versus Planet of the Apes. Do you know how many of those fucking films there are?
We'll do all of them, all in one episode, which will be 7 hours long.
Please, the last time we did this fucking Batman episode was long enough.
It was an ordeal, listeners.
It really was.
But we've not had any tech breakdowns yet, so fingers crossed.
Well, let's see how that goes.
But yes, so 2022 which is this year, saw the release of The Batman, Warner Bros. Latest attempt to reinvigorate the franchise after the stinky poo-poo mess that Zack Snyder left all over the place.
All over Christopher Nolan's crackhead energy that he just shot all everywhere with The Dark Knight Returns. Dark Knight Rises? That was it.
Yeah, Dark Knight Rises an excellent film.
Returns was the good one. Rises wasn't.
Dark Knight Rises, which we all agree was an excellent film.
It is a crackhead movie, and I will not hear any different.
I'm crashing this plane. With no survivors. That's a bad plane,
I feel like we shouldn't get too bogged down in discussing this because we do have 4 films to talk about. But
yes,
we should.
But we've got, and also we might, because obviously this is Aidan and Marc versus Batman, but it's not the complete Aidan and Marc versus Batman yet, because we're just doing the 4 movies from the late 80s and through to the 90s.
So the original glut of Batman movies.
Yeah, and unfortunately for now we're not going to be talking about the Adam West Batman.
No.
We may cover that at a later date. The movie, that is. We're not going to go through the whole show, because brilliant though it is, there's a lot of it.
Yeah. Unless you guys want to do some kind of watch along with us, but I don't see that happening.
Hey, unless we start a Patreon, in which case...
Yeah, if you pay us, we'll watch Batman with you. That's kind of how it works.
If you want us to talk endlessly about the Adam West Batman, yeah, get your friends listening so we can get enough listeners to start a Patreon, please.
Yeah, that's all you got to do. If you want to watch Batman with us, fucking pull your finger out.
Get your head out of your ass.
Just,
I'm only
pull
joking.
Your finger out, you lazy bastards.
Right, listen,
anyway.
We're talking about anything other than Batman because we're so fed up of having to record this episode.
Yes,
So, Mark, what were your feelings on The Batman from 2022, starring Robert Pattinson?
Bats, yeah.
The Batman.
No, I quite liked it. It's very long. That's the main thing I'll say about it. It's far too long. It does not need to be almost 3 hours long, and you could definitely cut some stuff out of it, and I feel like the film wouldn't suffer too much. But on the whole, I quite liked it. I thought, for the most part, the sort of leaning slightly more in sort of the gothic grim atmosphere was good again. I thought Robert Pattinson was good. Dano's Riddler, that was a choice. Not 100% sure it really worked for that character, but I was fine with it sort of aping all those kind of weird like Giallo movies and weird fetish mask wearing killers and stuff. I thought that was kind of fun. I liked all the mob boss stuff because it was very reminiscent of things like Long Halloween and Dark Victory, and which are some of my favourite Batman stories. The action scenes were pretty good. The soundtrack was good. Cinematography was good. It's just too fucking long, and it really kind of buckles under itself in the third act. There's my summary of that movie.
Yeah,
what did you think?
Yeah. Okay, well, bearing in mind that we may come back to the Batman in a future episode, so I don't want to go on too long.
Yeah.
And bearing in mind, like, when we rewatch it, my thoughts may have settled more. Blah, blah, blah. I thought... I'm kind of in the same boat as you are, but I think my thoughts kind of tend more towards the negative. I think there's a lot to like in this movie. Long though it is. Interminably long though it is, I should say. It doesn't have 3 hours worth of plot. That's the elephant in the room. It doesn't actually have 3 hours worth of anything. If this was cut down to 2 hours, I'd probably have stronger feelings towards it. But listen, I think the fundamental thing for me with this movie is it doesn't seem to quite know what it's trying to do with the setting and the characters. Like, aesthetically, I liked it, but I mean, and I will also say, like, this movie, they were shooting it for like 3 years, and I know that they did more digital background stuff than they wanted to, which is kind of evident in quite a few scenes. I think like a lot of those rooftop scenes, it's like, well, that's not a real skyline.
Yeah,
but,
those shots looked bad in the trailers, and I thought, they might fix that for the movie. And then the movie came out, and I was like, oh, they did not fix that.
Yeah, and I think especially in direct contrast to like Christopher Nolan's films, where they look like they take place in the real world. It's kind of there's a bit of a contrast there, and like that takes a little thing and like I understand they're going for a slightly different thing, but with that side of it, I could kind of... I like Matt Reeves as a director, but he's very much a hired gun, and I think what you could see in this movie was the studio execs going, well, they didn't like the Snyder version, so cross that out. They liked the Burton version, so let's have 20% more Burton in the aesthetic. They like the Nolan version, so let's have 60% of that. And, you know, just kind of like, you could almost see the equations a little bit. And I think that's evident in the fact that they even include the Riddler and, spoiler alert, the Joker. Because, like, those characters don't really need to be in this story. Like,
no.
Because even though the Riddler's, like, central mystery, quote-unquote, is kind of what drives the plot. Actually, what drives the plot is all the stuff with Falcone and the Penguin and, like, the political atmosphere. Which is infinitely
more interesting.
Yeah, and I think you could have got through that with just Batman and Gordon. You didn't need the Riddler being the one to guide them through it. That said, there are a lot of scenes that I really enjoyed. I did like the scene with the guy in the church when has the bomb around his neck and they have to solve the riddles.
Really, really well put.
Because that was the one scene where the Riddler was the Riddler. I liked all the action scenes, to be honest. I think they were all pretty cool. Like the car chase and stuff with the Penguin. I especially like the bit where he has to punch Gordon in the face and... You know, he's like running out of the police head building and then ends up on the top and then has to dive off with his shitty little flight suit. Was kind of fun. I really, really enjoyed Robert Pattinson as Batman, to be fair. Yeah. I think if he hadn't been in the film, I think I would hate this movie, actually. Obviously, we've shouted out to Jeffrey Wright quite a bit, and he's great as Gordon. Perfect casting.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think I nearly said Lenny Kravitz, but that's not right. I think Zoe Kravitz
I'd
is
watch
great
a film where Lenny Kravitz plays Catwoman.
What, just is this tight package bulging?
That's his whip, mate.
Oh.
Just swinging by his dick across Gotham. Yeah, give me that movie.
Well, there's an image for you. And Zoe, if you're listening, there's an image about your dad.
Hi, Zoe.
Yeah, I thought she was great as Catwoman. Yeah, I mean, obviously that we'll kind of cap it there because we don't want to talk too much about this.
Yeah, I think if we're going to shout one last thing out about it before we move on, is Colin Farrell is fantastic as the Catwoman.
Yeah.
He's unrecognisable as well. Like, that makeup job is superb.
Yeah. In general, I think and this is one criticism I don't like to level too much at movies, but I do think it takes itself a little too seriously, would also be my other thing.
Yeah.
Like, I get what they're going for with it, like they're trying to tell this like kind of story about like what actually is Batman, like blah 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 blah. And I kind of think we've had too many Batman films to really do that right now. And what I want is just have a Batman adventure. We don't need this gubbins around it. And to be fair, when it was committed to being like this kind of pulpy crime story, I really enjoyed it. It's just when it went off into the Riddler and the like, ooh, Batman, aren't we kind of the same when you think about it? Like all of that, like, come on, leave it out. Yeah, and also, I kind of thought, I saw The Dark Knight, you know? I've seen that. And I've seen it done better.
Yeah, we've already seen a Batman movie that is taking itself very seriously. Like we've been there. And I mean,
but even The Dark Knight has more humor than this movie.
Yeah, it has a lot more levity, definitely. And like my thoughts on the Batman or the Nolan Batman movies, which we will come to at some point, are not particularly my preference because they do take themselves a little bit more seriously and they're a bit more sort of grounded within reality, which is not particularly how I like my Batman. But I think those movies definitely balance their tone a lot better than what this new one does. This new one swings for the fences and doesn't quite land all over the place.
I will say, having rewatched Batman Begins and The Dark Knight prior to the Batman coming out, there's a lot more humour than people realise in those movies.
I haven't seen this film for a long time, so I couldn't really comment.
Especially Begins, like, because I was watching it with friend of the show, Abby Balabi, and we were both commenting on the fact that, like, there's actually way more, like, we were kind of saying, like, Marvel energy, but, like, the idea of, like, the characters are way quippier than people remember, I think. Which is kind of a sign of the times they were made, I think, but, like...
Yeah.
It's interesting to go from that to the Snyder... we simply cannot have Batman be humorous at all, to then the Batman where you kind of have this weird thing. It's not that it's totally humorless. And to be clear, when I say humour, I don't necessarily mean I need there to be, well, that just happened kind of stuff. But
just levity. There needs to be characters need to show they have senses of humour, I think. Yeah,
precisely. And I think that's what Nolan actually does quite well in most of his films. Is like there's never like comedy moments necessarily, but like the characters make jokes and are funny with one another.
Yeah, the humour's kind of more realistic. Slice of life, really, I guess. Yeah. Like, it's just things that people would say, yeah.
And I think as well, like, the thing that he utilises that Matt Reeves doesn't is Alfred for that kind of stuff. Because, I mean, also he has Michael Caine as Alfred, so, it's kind of... He lends it a sense of gravitas, but also a sense of, like, he can be the one who's like, well, Master Wayne, what are you playing at? Blah, blah, blah. And, it can be kind of, he can do that. And that's what Nolan uses Kane for in all of his movies, right? He's the one who can kind of go, isn't all this a bit ridiculous, though, Master Wayne? And, you can have that without it feeling too weighted, in that direction.
I feel like that's just Michael Caine to Christopher Nolan. Like, do we really have to drive this helicopter into this building, Mr. Nolan?
Yeah. Are you entirely sure that it's necessary to flip a truck in the middle of Chicago?
I mean, only if you are sure, Mr. Nolan. Concerned Michael Caine is our new character.
And for more concerned Michael Caine, tune in to Season 2, Episode 1.
Ooh, that was very good. You're like trying to take my segue cred away from me. What's that about?
But anyway, that's enough talk of the Batman. We may get into a more detailed review of that at some point. I do want to say, a lot of people seem to really like that movie. if that's the version of Batman that you go to and you're like, yes, this is it, fine, good, well done. I will say what I find annoying is I don't like this thing that we always have to do in these franchises where we go, well, it shits all over this previous incarnation, and it's like, come on now. Like, it was annoying when the Nolan Bros did it. It's annoying now when the fans of the Batman do it to the Nolan Bros. It's just annoying. Stop doing it. In a franchise like Batman, there's so many iterations that, like, yeah, there's going to be some versions that are your favourite, and there's going to be some versions that are not, you know?
Yeah, I think we're also seeing a lot of discourse around the fact that you've got a lot of people who have become quite jaded about the whole MCU stuff that are lauding the Batman for not being like those. And I have to admit, I definitely got a bit more enjoyment out of that movie because it did feel very different to all the MCU stuff because I've become quite fatigued with that myself.
Yeah.
But I can't say it's a perfect movie because it's really not.
Yeah, and I get that. I appreciate the more serious tone and like all that kind of stuff, but I think it still has some of the hallmarks of the MCU that I really don't like the very obvious setups for sequels and stuff, which are all over this movie.
Again, it feels like you say, with Matt Reeves being like a hired gun, it does feel like the studio definitely have their fingers in many pies of that movie, and they were like, we have to put the Joker in it because, you know, that's franchise. Yeah,
exactly. And it's like the Joker's in it for no reason. Like, there's no... I know there's a deleted scene that they cut out that I think we've both seen at this point, but like, that was cut out, and now the scene with the Joker just doesn't need to be in there.
But speaking of the Joker, let's talk about an actually good one, because we're starting off with Batman 1989, directed by Tim Burton, which obviously stars Michael Keaton as Batman, Jack Nicholson as the Joker. You've got Kim Basinger, Bryan Singer. No.
Oh no! Oh no! No! Now talk about a supervillain.
Kim Basinger, Billy D. Williams, Michael Gough, Jack Palance. Really good stacked cast of this movie, which I have to say about Tim Burton in general. I always think that he's very good at casting.
Yeah, he's very good at casting the same 5 white people over and over again.
Okay.
Although not at this point, I should say.
No. And, you know, we did obviously allude to this in the cursed time we talked about this, but I do want to quickly just flag it up again, in that I am a big fan of Tim Burton, and I feel like today that's like a shameful thing to admit to, because he has made some absolute guff in recent years. Like, he has fallen off the wagon hard. He's fallen off the wagon John Carpenter, Dario Argento style. That's the thing.
Well, it's kind of different from those guys, though, because he's making these big, you know, millions of dollars movies. Like, he's kind of become a company stooge for Disney at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't see Dumbo because, you know, life's too short.
But, you know, he also did like Alice in Wonderland,
which was guff. Absolute guff.
I don't know if this is Disney, but obviously there's like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory and...
No, it wasn't Disney that helmed that, but yeah, I mean, that movie is... I mean, I don't think that film is as bad as most people say it is, but it's still not particularly great.
It's probably one of the better ones among his more recent output, I would argue, but... Yeah, I mean, he has this run of films from the 80s to sort of like 99, so from Pee-wee's Big Adventure, which is great.
That's a great movie. I'm glad you agree with me on that. I think that movie's fantastic.
From there to like Sleepy Hollow in 99 is pretty much banger after banger.
Yeah, I've got the list here just for the listeners. So like, this is just
hit us with the Burton list.
It's an insane run of movies. So, starting from 1985, you've got Pee-wee's Big Adventure, Beetlejuice, Batman, Edward Scissorhands, Batman Returns, Ed Wood, Mars Attacks, Sleepy Hollow. Like, what a run of great movies.
Yeah.
And then Planet of the Apes happened. So we're circling it all back.
Yeah, there's kind of weird connection between these, between this movie and The Batman, right? Is that both the directors made Batman movies and Planet of the Apes movies.
They just clearly really like monkeys.
Who doesn't?
That's true. They are great. So no, Batman 1989. So this is something that we both know a lot about, but obviously a lot of our listeners might not. But this movie was a big deal when it came out.
Yeah,
this was huge. Like, nothing had ever really been done like this before. And I know you definitely have all the spiel on this, so I'm going to hand it over to you, because
I don't.
I'm putting pressure on you.
Yeah, so, I mean, the thing to really say about this movie, in terms of the kind of hype around it, I suppose, is So Batman was in an interesting place in the cultural zeitgeist in the sort of late 80s, right? Where the dominant cultural impression of the character was very coloured by the 60s TV show with Adam West. A show that we all now recognise as genius, and was very popular in the late 60s, but there was a resentment from comic book fans that this had become the kind of kidified version of Batman that people kind of thought of, right? This sort of campy, ironic take, right? I will say that's kind of an unfair perception from fans at the time, because the comic books at the time were very much the same tone. So this was, comic books being affected by the comics code. We haven't got time to get into that, but basically reducing down the violence, making them more kid-friendly, Silver Age stuff. So Silver Age Batman, to some extent, pretty much was the Adam West show, right?
Yeah.
That's what they were adapting and responding to. I mean, they added more irony to it and more tongue-in-cheek humour, but essentially is a page-to-screen adaptation. However, since that show had been off the air for a decade or so, well, over a decade at this point, 1989, that the Tim Burton movie comes out, the perception had started to change. There's this kind of divide between, obviously, people who are still familiar with the comic books, because then the comics code started to fade away and they kind of started to go back to, the more original incarnation of Batman, this kind of noirish detective type stuff in the 70s. And I know that people like Alan Moore and Frank Miller in the 80s get a lot of credit for quote-unquote reinventing Batman, taking him back to the darker roots. So Alan Moore with The Killing Joke, Frank Miller with Batman Year One, Dark Knight Returns, and so on and so forth.
Fantastic stories, by the way.
Yeah, and obviously iconic. But there were writers like Denny O'Neil and Neil Adams, and the artist Neil Adams, who had this legendary run from sort of the late 70s throughout the 80s on the mainstream Detective Comics and Batman. Which is changed. I mean, they covered a lot of different genres, but they're kind of going back to this classic idea of the Dark Knight, the detective Batman, and kind of slowly working it back to that. So, what people sometimes don't quite realise when they're recounting the history of Batman going from campy back to dark, is that there was all this stuff that preceded Batman Year One. Year One was kind of a response to that. Was them kind of going, oh well, people want this new version of Batman. They want to go, or not even new version, but going back to the classic iteration. And Year One was kind of a reboot that took that, took that mentality and kind of went, okay, let's modernize it. And so that's kind of what that is. Very similar in a weird way, and obviously this movie takes a lot of influence from that comic book, but very similar to the way that Batman Begins is kind of taking it back, quote unquote, to the darker tone of the Burton movies, but kind of adding this modern sheen to it after the Schumacher movies. It's very similar. They reflect each other in that way.
Well, Batman's thing just seems to go in cycles, really, doesn't it? So.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like Bond, I guess, is the only thing you can really compare it to, where, whenever they introduce a new Bond, they go, well, this is going to be the most serious, the most proper, the most edgy, the most faithful. And then, 3 or 4 movies later, it's just become the campy Roger Moore era again. And then it cycles back over and over and over, round and round and round like that. I think Batman's quite similar. I will say we've been in this dark and gritty vein for quite a while. But anyway, that's maybe something we can discuss at a later date. In terms of Batman, 1989, the hype was real around this movie, because the desire had been building in the fandom, and that kind of bleeds out into the general population, for a proper, quote-unquote, take on Batman, a dark take on Batman. And so, Tim Burton's announced as the director, and people are generally into this idea. Even though Pee-wee's Big Adventure is not necessarily like a particularly dark movie, it's like a kid's movie. Has its moments. Yeah, we all remember Large March.
Oh my god, I mean, I'm still having nightmares about Large March, mate. Like, Jesus fucking Christ, I was not prepared for that as a child.
Yeah, the perception is, this is... Because he'd done Beetlejuice at this point as well. So Beetlejuice is a big hit, and people kind of like this sort of macabre, gothic vision that he's bringing to it. So the perception was they've hired this real director with a real vision to make Batman cool again, essentially. Then things get controversial, because Burton brings with him the star of Beetlejuice, Michael Keaton, who he casts as Batman.
Not Alec Baldwin, the other star of Beetlejuice.
Yes, well, we said this last time. He must have gone into the WB and gone, I've got just the guy to play Batman. It's someone I've just worked with on Beetlejuice. And they're looking through the Beetlejuice cast going, well, it's not going to be Gina Davis.
Can you imagine, though?
I mean, that would be something. But they must have been going, oh, well, you know, he looks good in a suit. He's got a gravelly voice. Yeah, Alec Baldwin, surely. And then he goes, no, Keaton.
And they probably went, because you can't see his fucking face in the movie.
Yeah. Although, fun fact, before we get further into this lecture that I'm now giving you, there were several iterations that almost became movies along the way, but never quite got off the ground. I want to flag up one version, directed by a friend of the pod, not really, but recently deceased friend of the pod, Ivan Reitman, was going to star Bill Murray as Batman. And I believe they wanted Peter O'Toole for the Joker.
Somewhere there's a timeline that exists where that is a thing, and I need it. I need to know what that movie was.
Cocaine-fueled iteration of Batman ever, I'm sure.
I think, the Joker's not even wearing face paint, it's just coke. Just slapped on the face. It would have been
from what I understand, the pitch was closer to the Adam West show than what we got with Tim Burton.
It would have to be, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
Though that team of people are not making gritty, dark Batman, okay? They're making Adam West does a shitload of coke. That's what
Peter O'Toole could do a serious Joker.
Yeah, no, absolutely. But alongside Bill Murray and Ivan Reitman, I don't see that being the case.
No.
Not at all.
Well, that's that anyway. So, yeah, Tim Burton's Batman comes out. People were naysaying on Michael Keaton because the role he was most known for outside of Beetlejuice was Mr. Mom, which is a largely forgotten comedy where the premise is, what if a man had to stay at home and raise the kids?
That is a scandalous idea, and whoever wrote that should be ashamed of themselves for ever suggesting such a thing. Can you honestly imagine a time where that was cutting edge?
That was funny enough to be the premise of a movie.
Some execs went, yeah, do you know what? Yeah.
And I'm sure at the end of the movie the whole thing is, it's fine that he stays at home and is the dad, right?
Well, you'd hope so, wouldn't you? You'd hope so.
But I mean, this is the 80s. The 80s were a lawless, godless time.
They were. They were probably just doing coke at the end, I don't know.
Yeah, just doing coke off the baby's head. So people were kind of naysaying this. There's a great video clip that Abdul flagged up to me, which I'm going to put on the Facebook when this drops, where you can literally see a news thing from the time of fans bitching about Michael Keaton being cast as Batman, and it ends with Adam West being interviewed on the subject, and West loses interest in the interview question as he's answering it, and it's very funny.
I've not seen that, but I'm definitely looking forward to it.
Yeah. So, anyway, this movie comes out. Well, first of all, they've got the Joker. They cast Jack Nicholson as the Joker. There was several other people that they kind of floated and knocked about a bit. Tim Burton wanted Brad Dourif at one point, and the studio went, who? And he went, never mind.
Understandably, Brad Dourif might not be the biggest star, but if you are familiar with Brad Dourif, you would absolutely want him as the Joker, wouldn't you? He's kind of perfect for it.
If people don't know the Chucky movies, then Grima Wormtongue in Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I was thinking off the top of my head, what else do I know Brad Dourif from? And I'm like, yeah, nobody's going to know those movies.
Yeah. It's kind of wild that he's in Lord of the Rings, actually. But,
yeah. I mean,
he's great. He's great in it, but yeah.
Yeah, I mean, other than that, he's in Blue Velvet. He's in The Exorcist 3. He's in that one really good
X-Files episode. Yeah, I knew you were going to say that.
It's great. Sue me.
Anyway, so yes, one thing to flag before we get into the plot of this movie. I think it's important to say this movie influences Hollywood for decades after. Not just in terms of being a successful comic book movie, but in terms of how this movie was sold, the way that they used a pre-existing IP. People always talk about Star Wars and Jaws at the end of the 70s being kind of the birth of the blockbuster, right? Or kind of influencing the form in which the blockbuster movie takes from then on. Obviously, there are other movies that were similarly successful, but you're looking at, in the case of Star Wars, science fiction becoming this big blockbuster genre, whereas previously it was a bit more niche. And obviously in the case of Jaws, like just what should have been a cheapy thriller ending up being this big cultural event, you know. Because prior to that, only real movies were successful.
Well, yeah, you know.
No, that's a joke, but yeah. So Batman 89 I think also needs to be mentioned in the same breath, because this movie kind of definitely influences the 90s, without question, the 90s blockbuster. But I think we're still seeing the effects of this today. Well, this is kind of the first iteration of what's this IP that we've not done anything with for some time. IP for those not in the know, intellectual property. That's i.e. something that the studio owns copyright to. But it's the first kind of iteration of that where they go, what do we own that we're not doing anything with, that we can do this massive rebrand of and sell as a new product? And that's essentially what Batman 89 is. I don't think it's as cynical as it is nowadays, but that, you know, there is an element of that. Because when you look at the marketing campaign for this, the initial poster for this movie, and many other movies tried this in the 90s and didn't succeed because they weren't as well known as Batman, but it's just a black poster, bat symbol. The first poster doesn't even have names above the title. It doesn't even have a title. It's just bat symbol, black background, release date. And they knew that's all they needed. And there were billboards apparently throughout America of just that. Yeah. And people went crazy for this movie. It was a huge, huge hit. So I think in that regard, I mean, it also kind of ushers in this weird era of the 90s where they tried to do comic book movies, but based on comic books from the 30s. Because I think what they kind of took away from I almost said the Batman, but from Batman 89 is like, oh, what people like about this is the kind of mishmash of aesthetics from the 30s and from the 80s. So let's try and do that. So you have these movies like Dick Tracy. They really tried the same marketing campaign there, and it's kind of the same deal, right? Where like the biggest where they get Al Pacino to play Big Boy Caprice, right, the villain in that. It's kind of the same deal, right? Where you've got Jack Nicholson adding legitimacy to 89. It's the same thing there. They even have Danny Elfman do the score for that movie. That's all I'm saying.
I've never seen it. Is it Madonna in it? From what I remember.
Yes.
Yeah.
Me and Abby Balabi rewatched that one recently, and that is a weird fucking movie.
Okay.
We will cover it at some point on this podcast.
Cool,
so don't watch it.
Dick Tracy.
Don't watch it. Don't watch it, Mark, until we cover it on the podcast.
I'm pretty sure it's had a Blu-ray re-release recently, so I might.
It has. It looks crisp. It looks crisp. Anyway,
crisp dick, yeah.
So you have this Dick Tracy, the Phantom, the Shadow, all these kind of like pulp heroes that they're trying to bring back, because for some reason the lesson Hollywood took away from this was people want old things from the 30s, because obviously Batman's from the 30s.
Not people in rubber suits beating each other up, which is very much now.
Yeah. And I think even then, like when they came round to eventually getting it right and started doing Bryan Singer, known rapists, X-Men, and Sam Raimi, known decent blokes, Spider-Man, they're very much throwing back to the formula of Batman 89 in a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, the other thing as well, which you mentioned in very, very great detail last time when we tried this, was that it also was like a multimedia event as well. Like, there was a toy line. I'm pretty sure McDonald's did the toys for the.
They did.
You got the Prince album, which for some reason is attached to this movie.
Well, I think because he's the most famous guy that Warner Bros. Records had on their roster at that point.
Which, from a business perspective does make sense. And I love Prince. Like, I really do. I don't know why his music is in this movie.
No, well, we'll get to that. But it definitely starts that trend of big blockbusters having these tie-in albums. Do you remember these, especially in the 90s and early 2000s?
Yeah,
music from and inspired by. Music from and inspired by. Because that was definitely something they did with Sam Raimi's Spider-Man as well. Because you had that fucking Nickelback track.
Yes, they did.
Yeah.
The absolute guff, yeah.
And obviously, like, the Schumacher Batman movies really lean into this, where they've got, like, U2, Smashing Pumpkins, fucking R. Kelly, another known rapist. some other people who... Oh, Seal, of course.
Yeah, because Kiss from a Rose was the song for one of these movies for some
it was
reason.
Batman Forever. And they have like all these big artists. So Method Man is on the Batman Forever soundtrack, even though he doesn't appear in the movie. And that was kind of always the con of these tie-in albums, right? Because it's music from and inspired by. So they can include like the 2 songs that appeared in the movie, and then like 7 other tracks.
Like just whatever else was kicking about that day, like whatever else they found on the desk.
Or as they did with the Schumacher ones, they'll just go like, "Hey, Method Man, record a rap about the Riddler," and he'll be like, "Ooh, yeah, the Riddler, ooh," and then you can just put that on the album.
Like they didn't even bother mastering it or anything.
Yeah. So anyway, we've kind of talked around the context of this movie, the impact of this movie. Should we get into the movie itself a little bit?
We should. I mean, I don't really feel like we need to go too far into the plot because everybody has seen these movies, surely. Like,
yeah, I mean, we can maybe give like a 2-line summary. Just Batman fight Joker.
Yeah, so it's a Batman versus Joker story, taking a fair bit of influence from things like The Killing Joke, which Tim Burton has admitted to being quite a big fan of, and has also said it's the only comic book he's ever read, which I find quite amusing.
Yes.
But no, so this movie shows how the Joker comes to be, and I also like the fact that this movie as well, Batman is already established. This is not an origin story for Batman.
Yes.
Because, again, it's going back to the whole marketing thing. People know who Batman is. They know Batman's story. They don't need to show it. But one thing this movie does do is during the opening scene, we see a family, a mum, a dad, and a child coming out of a movie theatre, going down an alleyway, and obviously we then think, oh, we're going to see Bruce Wayne's parents die, and this is not what happens. Instead, Batman swoops down and all this. And I thought that was a really cool little subversion that they did, which, for the time as well, was definitely, having a lot more faith in their audience than what I think a lot of these fucking movies do now, especially a lot of these comic book movies. But no, I really like the fact that, Batman is already pre-established because they don't need to give him an origin, but that opening is quite a nice little subversion on that idea. Quite
it's interesting because
'89, I think.
Yeah, it plays on the fact that the audience will know Batman's origin.
Yeah,
which I think is interesting.
And I think you wouldn't assume a movie from this time period would try something like that. Yeah,
and it's because that is an aspect of his character that is consistent across all these iterations. Even the Adam West show, in the first episode, you have a bit where Adam West as Bruce Wayne is like, yes, like the criminal who gunned down my own dear parents all those years ago. So like, that is an element that people know about Batman. So just in case any future Batman filmmakers are listening, you don't need to show it again.
You just don't. Like, we know who Batman is. It's like Spider-Man. It's like, we don't need another movie where we see Peter Parker get bitten by a radioactive spider. Yeah. We've had that twice before. We don't need
Uncle Ben get iced.
Yeah. Uncle Ben can already be dead. Just let Uncle Ben die.
Well, that is what they did with the MCU version, to be fair.
They did, and I think it's because, this is the third attempt they've had at getting Spider-Man done right. Yeah. And so,
And they kind of subverted it even then, because they have the quote-unquote Uncle Ben moment be Aunt May dying in the third one.
Yeah. Yeah, that does happen.
Spoilers for Spider-Man No Way Home if you've not seen it.
That movie that I'm pretty certain everybody under the fucking sun has seen.
So just a long story short, the plot. The Joker, he's a mobster called Jack Napier. He is accidentally dropped into some acid by Batman and becomes the Jokester.
Yeah, which is definitely something I'd like to flag up, because I think one thing about this movie that is quite interesting to me is the fact that it actually takes a lot of liberties with the Joker as a character. So the whole Jack Napier thing is original to this movie and has since become a thing in the comics as well. Like, whenever the Joker is assigned an actual identity pre-Joker.
Yeah, it's usually Jack Napier.
It's usually Jack Napier, yeah.
It wasn't in the Joker movie, presumably because they didn't have the budget to pay Jack Nicholson the shitloads of money he gets from being Jack Napier. Which, if people don't know, Jack Nicholson assigned one of the most legendary, I'm going to say it, burglary-based contracts I've ever heard of in my life.
Criminal, isn't it?
Yeah, he got so much of the back end of this movie and also the merchandising. he pulled to George Lucas. He was like, "Oh, I'll take a pay cut if you give me this much of the back end and also this much of the merchandising. Oh, and also any merchandising that features the Joker that's related to this movie, and also anything that uses the name Jack Napier going forwards. So that includes Batman the Animated Series, and that includes the comic books. So he's still getting kickbacks from this to this day."
I read as well, apparently, that because Jack Nicholson and Danny DeVito are good friends, and supposedly when Batman Returns was sort of in pre-production, Jack Nicholson was the one that basically went up to DeVito and went, "Do it. Just do it. You will make so much money."
Yeah. And look, fair play to them. I mean,
honestly, fair play to him. Like, he knew what he was doing, and like you say, he lends this movie a sense of legitimacy because he is brilliant in this film. It's one thing I will say as well, and I feel like this is not a controversial thing to say, but it feels like it should be, is that when you look at Jack Nicholson's like best performances, you obviously think of One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, The Shining. I think his performance as the Joker is right up there with the best.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's great in this movie. He has that kind of perfect blend of like actual menace and actual humor that kind of sit next to each other, especially when you compare him to like more recent iterations of the Joker, sort of post Heath Ledger, where it's just like, well, they're all just bad Heath Ledger impressions really, but they're all just trying to out crazy one another. Whereas what I like about the Nicholson Joker is he doesn't actually do that too much. Like, he seems like he knows what he's doing, even if what he's doing is insane objectively on the face of it. So we should say, so the Joker has a series of weird plans that seem to mostly be, well, he gets revenge on the mob boss who set him up, steals his woman, and also kills some other mob bosses, essentially making himself the clown prince of crime in Gotham as he should be. He then kind of goes on a series of bizarre rampages, one which includes selling dodgy makeup products that kill you? ?
That feels very out of the Adam West series, doesn't it? Like, that whole bit is very, very strange, and the whole broadcast on the TV that the Joker does with the dead models with the superimposed mouths is
so that's great.
Weird as shit. Very Tim Burton.
Yeah, there's a great scene where it cuts to a news broadcast where these two models have been found dead from mysterious causes, and it flashes up the image, and they've got the pale Joker faces and they're dead bodies, and then over the course of this broadcast, the female newscaster starts laughing uncontrollably, and then the Joker hacks into the broadcast to reveal that he's placed his Joker products in all these other beauty products, and I think that's great. As you say, it's very Tim Burton. It's really funny. I love the fact that he uses cardboard cutouts of the models in his broadcast, and he makes their mouths move going, "Love that Joker." It's
so great. It's
great. It's a good example of this movie has a lot of humor in it, but none of it feels out of place.
One thing I would say about Nicholson's Joker as well is I feel like it's kind of the perfect mid-ground between what he was doing and what Tim Burton was doing, because if you watch a lot of the scenes where the Joker's doing his like murders and stuff, it feels like Tim Burton was very much like, you need to play him as a mob boss. Once we've got that, do whatever the hell you want on top of it. It's like, as long as we've got you doing it as a serious mob boss, then you can just go crazy on top of it. And that's kind of what happens. Like the bit where he kills the rival mob boss, who his woman he takes. You have him shooting him in a very sort of realistic, cold manner, and then once he's already full of bullets, you've got him, bending over and shooting between his legs and over his shoulder, and it's really kind of silly. But again, that works because he's already shown that he's very dangerous, and now he's just gone completely insane.
I like the fact that you get to see him as Jack Napier, because you kind of see his descent. Although it's controversial to give the Joker a concrete origin story, I like that you see his kind of the Joker-esque personality traits that are already there in Jack Napier, like his vanity and his narcissism, but also his kind of need to be chaotic. Like the very fact that he's sleeping with his Don, essentially. He's sleeping with his Don's girlfriend for no particular reason. He doesn't seem to like her all that much. No. He just seems to be doing it because he can.
Yeah.
And you have that, then that's kind of the beginning of his his Jokerification, if you will. Like, the personality traits are already there. It's just when he gets his face burnt up and he's all disfigured and whatnot, he just finally lets loose into his, like, id, so to speak.
And it's one of the things that this movie does so well is it's very much show, don't tell. Like, when we see him as Jack Napier, he has the Joker card and he has the sort of subtle purple suits and stuff like that. And it's nice sort of visual cues. We also get that with Batman himself.
We should talk a little bit about Batman.
We should. I mean, I think that's one thing I'll say about both the Tim Burton movies is they're kind of not really about Batman that much. They're more about his villains, I would say.
Yeah, that's the common criticism. Yeah.
But personally speaking, I mean, I think Batman is a good character, and there's a lot that you can do with Batman. But I think the reason why I'm so into Batman, because I'm not really that into the superheroes that much, is because comparatively, I don't think anybody else has as well defined and well thought out series of villains, because I think compared to a lot of other heroes, Batman's villains actually are like more three-dimensional characters that stand apart from Batman. Like the Joker and Catwoman, people know more about those characters than they do some of the Marvel characters who are like the heroes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I think that's what the two Burton movies do really well, is that they focus on the villains and actually give them a lot of like love and respect, and I think that might be why I'm such a fan of them.
Yeah, I do want to shout out Michael Keaton's Batman. I think he's definitely up in the upper ranks of Batmen. I like his Bruce Wayne. He's kind of a weirdo.
It's very.
But he has that kind of like spacey weirdness where I think the Christian Bale Batman, well, Bruce Wayne rather. If you met him, you'd be like, yeah, I can buy this guy's Batman. But
he's got a shitload of money. He looks after himself. He probably would break a jaw. Yeah.
And he seems, super intense.
Yeah.
Whereas, like, the Keaton Batman, and, like, that's cool in its own way, but, like, the Keaton Batman, I think, has this thing of, like, there is the duality where when he's Batman, he's, like, super focused, super intense. And then when he's Bruce Wayne, he's kind of just drifting through life, doesn't really...
Yeah, he's very aloof as
register.
Bruce Wayne.
Yeah.
Kind of doughy-eyed as well.
But he's the first actor, really, to do this thing of separating Bruce and Batman, not just in terms of voice, but in terms of like the physical demeanor, very like keeping them very, very separate. Like they feel like two different personalities almost. And I think one thing this movie does really well that I think I'd like to see them do more. I guess you see a bit of that with the Matt Reeves one actually. Is he's always they're not afraid to make Batman a little creepy. Like he's always kind of bathed in shadow. Like even scenes with Vicky Vale, Kim Basinger. We have scenes where he takes her to the Batcave. Oh, sorry, to the Batcave, where he's kind of giving her stuff and being like, "Oh, you need to take this. It's the antidote for the Joker venom and all this." And he's like mostly cast in shadow, and it's shot like he's this like universal monster, and she's clearly scared of him. Because at that point, obviously, she doesn't know it's Bruce. But I like that they kind of lean into that he is this kind of almost like a Phantom of the Opera-esque character. In some regards. I think we are almost out of time for Batman 89, so let's quickly run down a character ranking. I know we didn't really talk much about the plot, but everyone's fucking seen Batman 89.
Yeah, like it is. The plot of this movie is literally just Jack Napier becomes the Joker. He just goes on a little crime spree, and then eventually has to tussle with Batman. That's kind of it.
Yeah,
and then like Vicky Vale and Bruce.
Vicky Vale and Bruce fuck. Turns out Jack Napier killed Bruce's parents.
Yeah, which is a weird inclusion, but I'm kind of fine with it because I feel like the Burton movies stand as their own thing, so I'm not too bothered by it. But it's a bit of a strange choice. Yeah.
So, character rankings. Okay, so Batman / Bruce Wayne, Michael Keaton.
Michael Keaton might be my favourite live-action depiction of Batman. So I'd say it's a hard 10 for me. I think he does really well, like you say, the duality. And again, like you mentioned how like Jack Nicholson's character just becomes like pure id. I feel like there's like degrees of that with Keaton's performance, whereas Batman, he's a lot more kind of free, I guess, and like you say, focused.
Yeah.
And I think there's sort of shades of that sort of thing going on. But I like him a lot. I love him. That's what I say. I love him. Yeah,
I agree. Hard 10 for me. I will say in this movie the suit isn't doing him any favours. It's clearly a bit ill-fitting.
No, it's very stiff.
Yeah, but I think he works with it, and I really like his Bruce Wayne. I really like his Batman. He's convincing as Bruce Wayne. He's convincing as Batman. Yeah, I really like him. I don't think there's much more to say. Really, I mean, it's kind of uncontroversial, right? Michael Keaton is pretty beloved as Batman.
Yeah.
So character 2 that we need to rank then. I think we've kind of talked this character to death, so let's just give a number. Jack Nicholson as the Joker.
It's 10, isn't it? Like, he's fantastic, and
I'm
really quite glad as well, because you were saying earlier about the whole Heath Ledger thing, where everybody's now just trying to do that. I don't think anybody has really tried to ape the Nicholson one. Like, they've not tried to replicate it that much, and it very much exists as its own thing, and I'm happy about that. Yeah, he's fantastic in this movie, and I really like his version of the Joker. He's kind of covers all the bases of the things about the Joker that I like.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a hard 10 for me as well. He's so entertaining in this film. That's kind of all there is to say about it. Kim Basinger as Vicky Vale.
I quite like her, but she's just kind of, for the most part, just your love interest character. Really, there's not a whole lot, and she kind of helps to highlight Bruce's awkwardness and the fact that he's just existed within this bubble as like a rich dude his entire life and stuff.
I do like when they introduce Vicky in this, because in this she's a photographer. She's normally a journalist, but she's a photographer.
Yeah, in the comics,
yeah. I like that when they introduce her. Her reason for going with Knox, who is a character we will not give a rating to because he's a non-entity, to find out more about Batman. The reason she gives is, I like bats. And I think that's a Giga Chad energy, to be honest. I think she knew what she wanted, and it was a stiff dicking from Batman. And you know what?
Got it.
She got it. But no, I like Kim Basinger in this movie. She's quite charming. As you say, she's not given much to do, other than be menaced by the Joker and, fall in love with Bruce. But I like that she's fairly upfront about wanting to jump Bruce's bones.
Yeah, and I think Burton does really well with their scenes as well. Like, I really like the scene where they're sat having dinner, and because obviously Bruce's manor is fucking huge. They're both sat on the opposite ends of this large table, and the whole thing is just ridiculous because they can't hear each other. And then they settle for having an intimate dinner with Alfred, which is obviously where Bruce feels more comfortable. I think, even though she doesn't really get a whole lot to do, I think Burton makes good on her character with scenes like that.
Yeah, I agree. So in terms of numerical rating, I'm probably going to give her like an 8.
Like, 7 or 8, she's good. But she doesn't leave much of an impression, I think, and it's a shame because I've seen Kim in other movies.
Lil Kim.
From Lil Kim to Bryan Singer, the Kino Inferno story.
Oh,
no.
God. Stop bringing him up. What about Michael Gough as Alfred?
I feel like we can apply a rating to him now because he is the only consistent thing across these 4 movies, which we should also point out. Like, he is the only real connective tissue because these movies go off on some fucking tangents. I like him a lot as Alfred. He's more in line with the sort of animated series version, I think, which is, again, my favourite. I like Alfred when he's kind of snarky.
He's kind of harsh, but it's kind of got a bit of a Jeeves vibe to him.
Yeah, like when Batman's just sort of going about his business, he's just like, oh, for God's sake, Batman. I like that. I like Alfred's just like, oh, he's like looking after a toddler. A rather large toddler in a bat suit is what Batman is. He's a little man-child. Yeah,
so I think... do you know what? We'll save our review of Alfred for Batman and Robin, where I think it's... we'll save it. Because, we'll assign the numerical rating later. Who else have we got? Let's see. Those are kind of the 3 main characters.
Yeah, I mean, other than that, you've got Pat Hingle as Commissioner Gordon.
Gordon.
Doesn't really get a whole lot.
Yeah, unfortunately, Gordon's kind of a non-entity in this film. I mean, he's definitely playing off the comic version of it from Batman. The series, I should say. That was confusing. The comedic version from the 1960s show. I like him, but he's not in it in much. It's nice that he pops up in all 4, like Michael Gough, but he's kind of a non-entity, so I'm going to have to give him a 7.5.
Yeah, I mean, it's like a 6 for me. It doesn't get enough to do.
Now we come to Billy D. Williams as Harvey Dent.
Again, doesn't really get enough to do, which is such a shame.
Yeah, unfortunately, I'm going to have to give him... I mean, he's great in the scenes that he's in. When you see him at like Bruce's fancy dinner, and then when you see him at the press conference and stuff, like he's great in those scenes. I'm going to have to take away points just because he never gets to be Two-Face across these movies.
Yeah, it's like a 5 for me. It's got to be split down the middle, I think.
Do you know what? I'm going to give what's there. I'm going to give it a 7 because it's Billy D. Williams and it's good. I think there was potential for a 10, but they never
came to be.
They fucked it.
It.
Okay. I think that's about it. There's not really
I think that's
character
about it, yeah.
Oh, no, one character we need to discuss is the Joker's henchman, Bob.
Oh, yes, of course.
Who I think... I mean, we're obviously going to give him a unanimous 10 out of 10.
Well, obviously, yeah.
But I think we do need to point out Bob, like we've had the Legion of Uncles in the past. By the way, Alfred, strong contender for the Legion of Uncles, is all I'm saying.
I mean, he runs the Legion of Uncles. What are you talking about?
Okay, so Alfred is he's part of the Legion of Uncles. I think we need to start a Legion of Henchmen and discuss the eligibility, because Bob is going above and beyond the call of duty here. He is so dedicated to the Joker, he will go along with any of the Joker's plans, even after he becomes the Joker. First of all, those Joker jackets all the henchmen are wearing with the little patch with the Joker's face on, you know who was stitching those patches on. That was Bob.
It was definitely Bob.
Second of all, at the end of the movie, when the Joker's frustrated, he's annoyed, he says to Bob, hand me that pistol, Bob. Bob hands it over, knowing full well the Joker's about to cap him, and the Joker caps him. And I just think, you know, there should be some kind of award for henchmen, and if there was, Bob gets it. Because Bob henches like no man has ever henched before.
He is fully committed to the Joker. He knows that his time's up, and he just hands him the gun. Kudos to you.
Yes. So on that bombshell, I think we should segue into Batman Returns.
Yes.
1992?
92, same year that I was squeezed out into this world, yes.
And similarly, a grotesque gothic creation.
So Batman Returns is the one that I'm most excited to talk about, because I'm just going to say it now, it's my favourite. It's my favourite Batman movie. I think I'd go so far as to say it's my favourite superhero movie. I love this movie so much, for many, many reasons. But we should, before we get into me just having a big old gush over why I love Batman Returns so much, I think a little bit of context is quite necessary. So, as we mentioned previously, the 89 Batman movie was huge. It's huge, like, multimedia event, you know, like toy lines. You've got, like, you know, cross promotion with music. It was this huge movie that made a shit ton of money at the box office. So it was an event, and it really kind of changed stuff, like you said, and its influence is still very much being felt to this day. So when they announced that there was going to be a sequel, obviously everybody was, you know, frothing at the gash for it. And so 3 years later, Batman Returns comes out. They try and do the same thing again. You know, they want a toy line, they want McDonald's toys, an album. They want everything. And then the movie came out. And hoo boy, did it get some backlash.
Yes, it got quite a bit of backlash. It was branded as an attack on kids at one stage. It was, because we should say, Batman 89 was considered to be like the dark reimagining of Batman, essentially.
And it is dark, you know, let's not deny that. It is quite a dark movie.
No, but like it's a movie that would probably get a PG-13 now.
Yeah.
It was a 15 in this country at the time, so I can assume it was R-rated in the States. I'm not sure about that. But
possibly, yeah.
But I think now it would be a 12 here, ergo PG-13 in the States. Batman Returns, however, ups the ante on violence, on sexuality, on pretty much anything that good Christian folk could be offended by, really.
Yeah, this is a lurid film for what it is. You know, it's not like truly tasteless and repulsive, but my God, it really goes in some directions. Like, Tim Burton clearly had a lot of fun making this one.
I mean, it's a classic example of he did a good job with the first one, so the studio backed off from him on the second one, and he made something that they did not care for in the end. Because we should say, this movie opens. I mean, it has an incredible opening scene that I want to shout out anyway, because it's one of the best sequences of Tim Burton's career, in my opinion. But it opens with a post-disgrace Pee Wee Herman, Paul Rubens, as Mr. Cobblepot, staring out of the window, smoking his long cigarette with his monocle on. And, you know, we hear the sounds of childbirth from the next room, and he runs in to go and see his wife. Well, first of all, the doctor's runs out and just shakes his head, which I like. So he goes in to see it, and then you just hear his pained cries from the next room. Cut to him and his wife both smoking and looking out the window. Behind them is a shaking cage, baby-sized cage, an iron box with some bars in it that's just shaking as if there's some unholy creature in it. Then a flippant hand pops out from between the bars, pulls in the family cat, and presumably eats it.
I'm gonna say
they then elect to toss their child into the Gotham City River in a basket, and the opening titles play with the Danny Elfman Batman theme, bam 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 bam, plays over a great sequence of Michael Keaton's name appears across a baby in a wicker basket floating down a sewer river.
You don't get that in the fucking MCU, do you?
And that is how we start in this movie. That is the origin story for this version of the Penguin. That's insane.
Yeah, because the Penguin is typically, shown to be a sort of member of high society crime boss kind of thing, whereas Tim Burton went, nah. Or at least the writers of the movie as well, because it's worth pointing out as well, this movie was predominantly written by Daniel Waters, who is most known for Heathers.
Took over from Sam Hamm, who has a story credit in this.
So there was
co-wrote Batman 89.
Yeah, couple of different hands on the script, but I believe the majority of the movie, as we know it now, was written by Daniel Waters, and there was somebody else that came in to do a rewrite as well. But Tim Burton paired with Daniel Waters, that shows a lot in this movie, particularly that opening scene. But as we say,
it's very... the humour in this movie is very similar to the kind of dark humour in something like Heathers. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it's riffing on that same sort of thing. And I think a lot of the scenes involving Catwoman are riding that Heathers line as well.
There's a lot of those kind of weird one, like obviously Heathers kind of gives us lines like, fuck me gently with a chainsaw and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Which this movie definitely has one-liners of that calibre throughout.
Yeah, my favourite will always just be Selena Kyle coming home, played by Michelle Pfeiffer, coming into the apartment saying the iconic, "Honey, I'm home. Oh, wait, I forgot I'm not married," which is just perfect. So perfect.
I'm a big fan of the exchange later on where one of the Penguin's goons says, "Boss, killing children, isn't that a little..." And the Penguin shoots him and goes, "No, it's a lot." I mean, we could quote this movie all day because I think we're both in the same boat as we're big fans of Batman Returns.
Oh, absolutely! I adore this movie, and I think the fact that I was such a big fan of it as a kid explains a lot. It certainly speaks to my love of Michelle Pfeiffer, I can tell you that much.
Yeah, I mean, this is a movie that I feel like most people of our generation saw at way too young an age because parents were just like, well, it's Batman. How bad could it be? Because I definitely remember seeing this movie, and I'd already seen Batman 89. I was working my way through the VHSs, right? I remember seeing this movie, watching the opening sequence, and already having a feeling of oh, what is happening here? It was already on a level of this is a bit weird and spooky, and I don't know what's going on. Obviously now, at that age you don't necessarily get the irony of these things and kind of the dark humour at play. So I could totally see why some kids were pretty disturbed by this movie. Because, let's face it, a lot of grim shit goes down in this movie.
Yeah, I mean, even as an adult, there's still a lot of really kind of provocative and violent and lurid shit that happens in this movie that I still find quite shocking in a way. I mean, Catwoman full on slices people's faces up in this movie. That's a big thing. We should probably sort of summarize the plot as well, because
let's go as briefly as possible.
Talk about the elements of this movie more than anything.
So let's go as briefly as possible. So after the opening sequence, we're introduced to Max Schreck.
Yes.
Who is Christopher Walken.
Yep. Who's an original character in this movie, not from the comics. And
he is an energy magnate who wants to build some energy plant, which turns out is actually going to make him some convoluted bullshit about he's going to siphon off a load of energy and make himself the the daddy. Obviously, Bruce Wayne already sees through him because he rejects this proposal and says he's going to fight him in City Hall. However, Max is giving out some presents for Christmas because this movie is a Christmas movie. We forgot to mention that. He's giving out some presents and stuff for Christmas, tossing out gifts into the like a rally kind of thing for the poor people. When the Penguin's nefarious gang attack and cause chaos in an attempt to... they do in fact abduct Max Shrek. Batman obviously beats up the rest of the gang and foils them. We're also introduced to Selina Kyle, who is Max's secretary, who is clearly browbeaten in her job, because at one point Max turns to his son, who, by the way, shout out to whoever that actor is. The actor playing the son does an incredible walking impression.
Oh, he does. He's great.
Like, it's not over the top either. He really rises the line of, like, you could believe this guy's Walken's son. Anyway, point is, Selina Kyle is the assistant. She finds out about the... sorry, I'll go back to what I was saying, because I realise I've just said something and not resolved it. Yeah, so Max talks to his son at one point, going... when he's giving the speech where he's giving out the Christmas presents, and he's like, I left my speech indoors. Remind me to take it out on What's-Her-Name later. which I like. So anyway, long story short, Batman foils this Penguin gang, but the Penguin's already abducted Max. And the Penguin is going to use Max to kind of get himself reacquainted to Gotham society. As it turns out, because of Max's dodgy policies regarding energy siphoning and ransoming thereof, the mayor is not a fan of him. So he wants to replace the mayor with a stooge, and he chooses the Penguin. So that's kind of like that
choice, given that the Penguin is a sewer-dwelling...
A filthy sewer beast, yeah. But Gotham City is kind of on the Penguin's side to begin with, because he has a sob story about his parents abandoning him. Bruce finds him suspect to begin with, but you know, he has some sympathy for him. But obviously, then later on, it turns out he's a wrong one. Basically, they use the Penguin's gang to create chaos, whilst also having, to make it look like the current mayor's incompetent. It's a mayor sabotage thing. They also frame Batman for murder, so the city turns against Batman. Meanwhile, all this is happening. Selina Kyle finds out Max's naughty plans, and Max shoves her out of a window to her death, where some cats come and lick her back to life.
They lick and nibble her fingers until she wakes up, which I guess is scientifically accurate.
No one knows what that scene's about, not even Tim Burton.
No.
It's a great scene.
Up, I guess.
It's very well... actually, to be fair, if you've watched Halle Berry's Catwoman, then you know these cats are the emissaries of the Egyptian cat goddess, who picks worthy women who have shown kindness to the feline community, but are killed in, shall we say, suspicious circumstances. This cat goddess chooses them to resurrect and seek their vengeance. So
it's like The Crow, but way less cool.
It is like The Crow, and it is considerably less cool.
Whereas I just like to think that the street cats of Gotham know that Michelle Pfeiffer is a bad bitch, and a simple fall out of a window wouldn't kill her. I think that's what that is. They're trying to just going, come on, bitch, get up. That's what they're doing. Yeah.
So anyway, Catwoman goes on her own rampage of revenge against society. She feels that she is downtrodden, and she's getting her revenge. Batman foils her several times, so she ends up siding with the Penguin in his attempt to frame Batman for the murder of the Ice Princess. Don't worry about the Ice Princess.
The movie sure doesn't. So.
But meanwhile, to the conflicts between Batman and Catwoman, Selina and Bruce have met because of Bruce's dealings with Max Shrek. They fall for each other. Because this Batman, the Michael Keaton Batman, we should underline this. He fucks.
Oh yeah, he is a hound. Like
he never
out those
stops.
truffles.
He did, because barely any mention of Vicky Vale in this movie.
He's already binned her off, mate. He had his way with
binned
her.
her off.
Straight on your
now he's on to the next one.
She's gone to take pictures of bats or something, I don't know.
Yeah, she's gone to jerk off to bats. Yeah, anyway, listen. So
enough about Kim Basinger frigging herself to bats.
it all comes to a head. The movie, I mean, not Kim Basinger. Regardless, it all comes to a head. Batman clears his name somewhat, or at least proves that the Penguin framed him. The Penguin is forced under the sewers. Bruce and Selina figure out that each other are Batman and Catwoman. But oh no, now the Penguin's doing a weird revenge plan where he wants to kill all the firstborn sons of Gotham because he's a maniac. Batman foils this plan, and so Penguin resorts to Plan C, which is rocket launching penguins invade Gotham.
Which, why that isn't Plan A, I don't know.
It's an excellent point.
If you've got rocket penguins, that's your fucking go-to, in my opinion.
It all kind of comes to a point. So Batman foils the Penguin's plan again, resulting eventually in the Penguin's death. Catwoman kills Max Schreck and dies in the process. Batman returns home, and the movie just kind of ends.
You've done a very good job of sort of condensing the plot, because I think compared to the first Batman movie, there is a lot more going on in this one. Like, it's telling more of a story, I think, and I think that might be one of the other reasons why I like it. And I know a lot of people complain that Batman and Bruce Wayne kind of get sidelined in favor of Penguin and Catwoman.
I think they kind of do for the second act, is the thing. Like Batman kind of disappears in the second act, but then kind of comes back for the third act. It's interesting because like Bruce Wayne's in it throughout, but I think Batman himself is kind of not as present as he was in the '89 movie.
No, Batman is more present towards the third act. Yeah, like you see more of Bruce. As you say, you see more of Bruce in the second act. But also, unlike the first movie, this has got 3 antagonists technically. I mean, Max Schreck definitely doesn't get as much screen time as what the other two do.
No.
But he's
kind of the puppet master. He's the instigator of all these different things.
Well, yeah, he's the true antagonist. Like, he is responsible for the Penguin's recent run of villainy that he does for the most part. Obviously, the Penguin was gonna do shit anyway. Shrek just kind of facilitates.
Yeah, but would have been less successful if Shrek.
Yeah, and he's directly responsible for Selina Kyle becoming Catwoman. So, yes. One thing I do really like about this movie, and it's something that we've talked about previously, is that it is very much a movie about 3 creatures of the night, as it were. All, traumatized and beaten people who are just existing in mostly fetish wear, let's face it.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of about these people who have gone through these hideous traumas and kind of have these bizarre personalities that they retreat into. And it's kind of like there's kind of 3 points on that triangle where obviously there's Batman, who's kind of, he's a dark hero but he is heroic, and then there's Catwoman who's kind of morally ambivalent. She does bad things, she does good things. She's not necessarily super heroic, but she's also not particularly villainous. Like, she still has a morality when the Penguin kills the Ice Queen, for example, or the Ice Princess, and she says like, "Oh, you said you were going to scare her, not kill her," and she doesn't seem like the worst thing in the world, but she's clearly, criminal, clearly lashing out. And then you have the Penguin, obviously abandoned by his parents, and kind of living this life in the sewer and kind of becoming this twisted, sick creature, and he's like the bad point of the triangle, I guess.
Yeah, because that's kind of how I've always seen it, is that you've got Batman and the Penguin on sort of opposite sides, and Catwoman is very much in the middle. Penguin represents what she could become if she keeps lashing out and goes down that path, but Batman represents what she could be if she decides to rise above it and not give in to that. And yeah, there's a lot of good sort of morally grey things going on in this film, and I think it explores a lot of really interesting ideas, and still manages to be this insanely horny, weird, gothic nightmare of a film.
Yeah.
Which is quite a feat, to pull that off, I think.
And I just kind of want to say about this movie as well, it's a tone that is very specific, but I think really works for a Batman story. This kind of gothic fairy tale, this kind of dark fairy tale aspect that Burton brings out in this movie. And it's kind of interesting because it's sitting alongside the political machinations of the Penguin and Max Schreck, so you almost have this slightly incongruous thing. But the entire aesthetic is so much stronger in this movie. It feels not that the first movie feels overly compromised, but for example, there's no Prince music in this. There's nothing in this that is jarring to the Burton aesthetic. It all kind of...
and like Burton's aesthetic is really like on front and center here. Like, you know, his love for like German expressionism and stuff like that is really, really at like the forefront. His entire like the way that he dresses his characters that become a lot more sort of prevalent further down the line is here, I think. With those sort of like outlandish outfits, like Penguin's outfit is pure Tim Burton. Catwoman's look in this movie is iconic. It's to my mind, it's the best Catwoman look. The whole like stapled up thing is just it's so cool. And Michelle Pfeiffer looks the business in that outfit.
She certainly does. Many people were sexually awakened by Michelle Pfeiffer in this movie. I
think I speak for both of us when I say that's us.
I think the interpretation of Bruce Wayne in this is it's an interesting development from the first one as well, because although he still has his compassionate side and like you get to see more of his kind of banter with Alfred and more of that, he definitely feels more aloof even than the first one, and he almost has this like slightly harder edge to his personality, like where he's straight up saying to Max Schreck, like, I'll fight you on this, you know, I'm not going to let you get away with this kind of thing. You also have one of the great Batman moments where he catches up to Schreck later on as Batman, and you know, Max Schreck has been, oh, thank God you're here to save me from Catwoman, and Batman just shoves him in the face and goes, shut up, you're going to jail. Which so he kind of has this, like, he is slightly more ruthless when he's fighting the Penguin's goons as well.
Oh, he straight up murders people in this film.
Yeah, a couple of people he does murk them for life.
He like, literally straps a bomb to a man at one point.
Yeah, and he sets one guy on fire with the Batmobile's like flame engine.
I know is obviously a big point of contention for a lot of Batman fans, because it's more of a modern idea, isn't it? That Batman doesn't kill. That's like his code of honor.
Well, because in the 30s original version, he literally had guns and shit, and like, you know, he was more in line with the pulp heroes of that time.
Yeah.
Since then, obviously, the Rogues Gallery has become a massive part of Batman. So I think the thing that's important to remember is the main reason the no-kill rule exists is so that you don't have to kill the Joker, you don't have to kill Riddler.
Yeah.
Like, it's taken as read that Batman would just take them back to Arkham rather than...
Tim Burton, however, did not get that memo, because he is ruthless with the villains in this movie.
He doesn't just kill wantonly, though. A little bit like, there are moments, there are a couple of kill moments that now are a bit like, bloody hell.
Yeah, because I will post this on the social medias. I didn't get to mention this when we were talking about 89, but I'm going to quickly mention it now. There's a TV cut that exists of 89 where during the whole bit at the end where the Joker is on the rooftop and he ends up falling off and such, there's a cut where it cuts all the stuff out where he's hanging off the edge of the helicopter. It literally has Batman punching him, and then it just cuts to him falling to his death. And it's magical, and I need to try and find it so you guys can see it, because it's...
Batman just straight up murders the Joker, just punches him off a building. Yes, but anyway, back to this movie.
Yeah,
I think we've kind of succinctly said a lot of stuff that we feel. I think one thing that I do want to shout out is obviously Danny Elfman's score is great again from the first movie and this one. I think in this one he's even more focused, like this tone of like this kind of bombastic gothic tone. Yeah, obviously the Danny Elfman score, which I think this is the last movie we actually hear the Batman theme from him, because it changes composers for the other two. But yeah, that we should definitely shout out that incredible, like the da-da-da-dan-dan, da-da-da-dan-dan-dan. Like, that is like the Batman music to me.
It's on par with like the Star Wars music, isn't it? Just for
or even the John Williams. Well, I guess the Star Wars is John Williams, but yeah, it's up there with the John Williams stuff of like Raiders of the Lost Ark, or like the Superman theme that he did. I think, in fact, I think that's the apt comparison, where the John Williams Superman theme there, you know the you know the thing.
We know the thing. Yeah.
It so evokes Superman in that way that even if you hear it now, even with years and years of other movies featuring Superman with different music, like you still, and like I think the Danny Elfman Batman theme has that quality where you could pretty much put it on any Batman film. And it would still pretty much work, yeah. And it would still pretty much evoke the character of Batman. Certainly, you could put it over the Christian Bale movies, I think, and it would work. The Snyder movies, maybe not, because that's just
not even Danny Elfman can save that, and that's saying something.
Yeah, that's just like grim men punching each other and grunting in the rain.
But I mean, I think just like the overall presentation of this movie as well, like not only the Danny Elfman score, but like just the the production design of this movie is incredible.
Yeah.
Like, this movie leans even heavier into the sort of gothic noir overtone. Because like the Gotham City of the Tim Burton movies is aside from the animated series, is probably my favourite version of Gotham. It feels very kind of lost to time, but also you were saying about how in the Batman it's done with that like new sort of green screening technology that they use. I don't know what it's called, but you know what I mean. This movie very much feels like it's done on sets and with matte paintings, and it's a very deliberate look and style that I do kind of miss in filmmaking. You don't really get that anymore. But
there's like a deliberate artificiality to it, the kind of
absolutely
comic bookiness.
And I think that's one thing I will say about Batman Returns overall, especially when you compare it to 89, is that it definitely feels more comic booky, and I think it might be due to those sort of weird elements that Tim Burton puts into it. It's definitely more traditional Batman compared to 89, I think.
Yeah.
Should we get into the character rankings?
Yeah, I think one thing we should mention, though, just because it's an interesting curio, a bit of information about this movie. Well, there's two things I want to mention before we get into the character rankings, and we've got time. First of all, we alluded to this earlier, but this movie became controversial among parents groups, and Mackie D's, in particular, were criticised for having a Happy Meal tie-in merch thing with this, because the movie was seen as so dark, so violent, and so sexual was another thing that people kept bringing into it. Because there is a lot of, I mean, this is the movie that features Penguin saying to Catwoman, "Just the pussy I've been looking for example."
Yeah, we also have Catwoman bathing herself next to Penguin whilst he just watches. You've also.
I mean, side note before I finish this point, that scene is fucking wild, because that's also the scene where she eats the live bird and releases it.
Michelle Pfeiffer did legit put a live bird in her mouth for this movie.
Yeah, it's only in one shot that it's an actual live bird. When she puts it in her mouth, it's a prop. But when she opens her mouth and it flies out, it is a real bird.
And again, you don't get that in the MCU, do you?
No, that is fucking weird. I
mean, fair play to Pfeiffer, man. Like, she was into this role.
Yeah, I mean that. I wonder if that bird shit in her mouth. Anyway, because birds are just crap, whatever, right? But anyway, that aside, so Mackie D's got really criticised for tying in with this movie, to the point where they had to actually broadcast a TV advert apologising for their mistake as they retracted the Batman Returns tie-in line.
Is that available
I just think
online?
It's crazy.
Like,
if it is, I'll find it and I'll put it on the.
Please do, because I'd love to see that.
Facebook. Yeah. So okay. There was something else I wanted to mention, but it's escaped me.
Still thinking about that bird shitting in Michelle Pfeiffer's mouth.
So yes, the other thing to mention is there is one character in this who was cast and was in the original script, but was removed before the movie shot. But will become immediately relevant in the next couple of movies. There was going to be a Robin in this movie.
Yeah, I heard about this. Yeah,
it was going to be. It was one of the
Marlon Wayans, wasn't it? Not.
I believe it was Marlon Wayans. Let me just double check that, because there's many of these Wayans.
Whilst you're doing because we never do any research. Whilst you're checking,
I did research for the last one, but I'm just freeballing it this time.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's quite a few instances with that in this movie as well, because like Michelle Pfeiffer wasn't originally cast as Catwoman; it was Annette Bening who had to step out of the movie because she fell pregnant. Which it would be interesting to see her play Catwoman, but to me, Michelle Pfeiffer is honestly perfect in this movie. I can't imagine this film with any other actress playing.
To confirm, it was going to be Marlon Wayans of the Wayans family tree. I'm not sure if he would have been Robin in this movie or just for the end, but he was going to be introduced as a mechanic who, because the Batmobile gets fucked up in this movie. I think the idea was he was going to be doing some repairs on the Batcave or the Batmobile, and he'd have like the little Robin logo would be part of his like mechanic kind of thing. And like it would kind of go from there, and then he'd be like Robin in the next movie, or at the end of this movie. It's not entirely sure, but basically he was going to be Robin for the rest of the franchise. So that's just another example that I want to point out as much as people like to criticise Burton for his, shall we say, not particularly racially diverse casting these days, that's the second time in this franchise that Warner Bros. Have stopped him from casting a black man in a role. Because, as we know, in the next movie, Harvey Dent is suddenly white, and Robin also white. Yeah.
Well, I mean, Burton, wasn't, but he didn't do the next one. He was exec producer apparently.
No.
As like a
courtesy. We'll get into that. We'll get into that. Let's do the character rankings.
Yes, we've already talked about Batman. He's a 10. I do like him a lot in this one. I love the first time you see him, where Bruce is just sat in the dark, just sort of staring into nothingness, and then the bat signal lights up, because I'm just like, what was Bruce doing? Does he just sit around and wait for the bat signal?
Just sitting in shadow waiting for the bat signal.
Just thinking about how Vicky Vale's just, frigging herself to bats or something, instead of him.
Good lord. I think he's retaining the 10 from the previous movie.
Yeah.
If anything, I slightly prefer his performance here, even though I do think Bruce/Batman gets sidelined a little bit.
Yeah, but I think all of the scenes he has that he shares with, say, Catwoman and Penguin are just great, and Keaton's got really good him and Pfeiffer have really good chemistry in this movie, I think.
Yeah, they're great. With that, we could move into Michelle Pfeiffer's Catwoman then, I think. I mean, we've said a lot about her, but since you just brought up the dynamic between her and Bruce, I want to flag up that I think one of the best scenes in this movie is the scene where they're at the masquerade ball. First of all, there's the oh-so-clever direction note that they're the only two people not wearing a mask at the masquerade ball, because the faces of the mask... We've seen Batman Begins, you get the idea. But the direction of the moment where they repeat the dialogue they've had to each other as Batman and Catwoman. So she says mistletoe's deadly if you eat it, and he says but a kiss is more deadly if you mean it, which they said the other way around as Batman and Catwoman.
Yeah.
So they realise that the other must be Batman and Catwoman respectively. I really love the way that Michelle Pfeiffer plays that scene. That look in her eyes when she's like, does this mean we have to fight now? Like a whole sense of what's going on just crumbling around her. It's directed really well as well, because it's those long close-ups on each of them kind of spinning around and then reversing the other way. It's just a good scene. Tim Burton doesn't direct well anymore, so I want to just flag up scenes where he has directed pretty well.
My favourite stuff with Catwoman in this movie is probably the scene where she becomes Catwoman. Where after she gets pushed out the window and the cats nibble her back to life. And then she goes back to her apartment and has that entire thing where she just goes insane and smashes the place up and takes her vinyl coat and turns it into the... It's amazing. Even down to the little details, like she has the neon sign that says hello there, that she breaks two of the letters and it says hell here, which I low-key want one of those on my wall. I think
that is crazy.
And it's just little details like that I love. And we have to also shout out at the very end, where she goes full tilt, insane.
Yeah.
And you've got crazy-haired Michelle Pfeiffer Frenching Christopher Walken with a taser, whilst also plugging herself into the national fucking grid.
Yes.
Which is wild.
It's a wild scene. And I like that scene as well, because I like how fatalistic Catwoman is, where she just sees it as she has to kill Shrek, come what may, kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. That's
because
obviously Bruce makes the choice, isn't it? Like she chooses.
Bruce gives her the option to come back with her, and she rejects it. And we do, of course, find out she's alive at the end, that she hasn't used up all her 9 lives.
I do get that throughout the movie, that's a motif where she believes she has 9 lives, and up until then, when she keeps going, "Oh, Batman killed me, the Penguin killed me," she usually kind of just gets dropped through windows.
She's not actually dead.
Yeah, I also do love that bit where the Penguin drops her through a window after attaching her to his umbrella, and she crashes into a rooftop garden and sits up and screams, which shatters all of the other glass around her. Which is just, again, that's a very Tim Burton-esque little moment, which I love, and it's also very comic booky as well. But yeah, and then obviously Max Schreck shoots her a couple of times, shoots her in the leg, and she keeps saying, 6, 7. Then she does the electrocution thing, and I'm like, right, okay, how the fuck did she survive that? That one I don't buy.
9 lives, baby. But yeah, I think we're both giving Michelle Pfeiffer / Catwoman a 10 out of 10.
Oh, she gets a 20 out of 10, mate. She's one of the sole reasons that this is one of my favorite movies. Like, she's just incredible, and all the scenes involving her are incredible.
Yeah, she's great. She's kind of the MVP of this movie.
Yeah, the real kind of saving grace. And that's saying something when you've got like people like Christopher Walken and Danny DeVito on screen as well.
Yeah, exactly. So, speaking of DeVito, let's segue into Oswald Cobblepot, the Penguin.
It's a 10. Like, I'm just going to say that right now.
For me, it's an easy 10, and not just because Danny DeVito's great. I think you see the DNA of his Frank Reynolds in this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Where he's just leaning into the kind of gross, filthy, disgusting and just overtly sexually aggressive character, right? But I think also like his commitment is insane. He's so not. I think this is one of the great things about Danny DeVito in general, but in this movie and as Frank in particular, like that lack of vanity that he has as an actor, where he's so willing to just commit to being this grotesque as possible. One thing I will say that I don't think we covered so far is that what I do like about this Penguin is that although he is unequivocally evil, you do pity him somewhat. Yeah, there is an element of him where, he was never really given a chance to blend in with society. I mean, his parents threw him into a sewer, as far as they knew, to his death. Luckily for him, though, he was adopted by penguins, because the sewer goes under the abandoned zoo.
I love that so much.
Yeah, it's crazy. But yeah, I think the thing that one of my favorite scenes in this movie, and indeed in any movie, is the penguin's final death scene, where he keels over and mournful music from Danny Elfman plays as several emperor penguins gently slide him into the sewer water, like a funeral procession of these emperor penguins, and he just sinks into, and like it's wild. You get this shot from like underneath the water as his corpse is like pushed in and floats for like under frame, and then there's just several penguins staring down somberly. And I really appreciate that Burton didn't play that scene as a joke at all.
No, it's serious.
Entirely serious. Yeah. And like Batman watching on, it's so good.
Well, I think Burton doesn't play any of it as a joke. He treats these characters with a lot of respect and treats them very seriously. And
I think that's the humour comes from dialogue and things like that.
And kind of the overall absurdity of it, really, I think.
But yeah, he commits to the psychology of these characters.
Yeah.
So bearing that in mind, I think I'm going to give Oswald Cobblepot, aka the Penguin, a 10 out of 10.
Absolutely. I mean, it's a huge deviation from what the character was initially, but I really like this version of the character, and I think they did something very different, and DeVito just is... He's a joy to watch, and just how vile he is in this film. Like, he ate that fish for real. Like, Michelle Pfeiffer put a live bird in her mouth. DeVito ate a raw fish.
A stanky raw fish, yeah.
Burton gets results, is what we're saying.
Okay, and let's... I don't think there's any other characters we really need to cover
Max Schreck
other than Max Schreck.
One. Yeah. It's Walken.
So let's go Christopher Walken, Max Schreck. Yeah, I mean, Walken's great in general. I think he's an unexpected joy in this movie whenever I watch it. Because obviously he's you kind of think of Max Schreck as being like, oh yeah, he's just sort of like this villainous character who's kind of in the background, but he lends so much to the movie. He plays it so straight as well, this thing of like being this evil businessman, but also, I like his kind of slightly bemused, his kind of greasy personality. Like, you see it with the Penguin where he kind of manipulates him round to like, well, if you come work for me, all this kind of stuff. You see it in the scene with Bruce where he's trying to manipulate him, but it's not quite working. I think he's a really interesting character, considering that he's just, on paper, he's just businessman who's a catalyst for the plot, right?
Yeah, just sort of, grooms these, people that have been traumatized and just puppeteers all of this stuff. I think you're right. On paper, that character is kind of dull, but Walken really imbues it with this, not like sleazy energy, but there's something very, very sinister about him.
Yeah. He knows exactly what he needs to do to make this character shine. And he plays that manipulative thing to a T. I mean, this is essentially a movie about a capitalist industry manipulating broken people for its own ends, and how that just results in literally everyone apart from Batman dying. So
yeah, and that's why this is my favourite Batman movie, because it really does have something to say, I think.
It's pretty based.
And it also has, Michelle Pfeiffer with a live bird in her mouth. So.
Yeah, which is always good.
It's proof I think that you can have everything.
So I think Max Shrek, 10 out of 10.
Yeah, absolutely. He also gets... he's also privy to one of my favourite lines in the movie, which is at the end, where he says, "Bruce Wayne, why the hell are you dressed up as Batman?"
Yeah, because he is Batman, you idiot.
Yeah, and then he just goes, "Was Batman," and shoots him, which is it's so great. The dialogue.
It's a great sequence of lines. Yeah,
it really this movie.
So I think we kind of we forgot to do this for Batman '89, so let's just do it for both the Burton ones now. On our patented scale of whatever it is for these episodes, Batastic, Jokerific, Catwoman, or Alfred. No, it's no. The rating system is good but I hate it, shit but I like it.
And also in theme, I feel like we could go with Batman '89, Batman Returns, Batman Forever, Batman and Robin.
Well, not to give the game away too early, but pretty much yes.
No, this is. I mean, '89 is great. I mean, what were we saying for great?
Good.
Jokerific?
No, we're just saying just stick to the thing. The bits I like.
I mean, they're both great. Like, they both are great. But of the two, Batman Returns is the better movie, in my opinion. There's a lot more going on. It's more visually distinctive. It's also one of those things as well where, like, when the age-old discussion comes up and people go, there are no sequels better than the original. I'm like, well, yes, there are, because Batman Returns exists.
Yeah. I think it has the... although it's a very different movie tonally to this, I think it has the same thing that The Dark Knight kind of has in a lot of people's minds, where the first one is a very solid bedrock, and then the second one is like they punt it into the stratosphere and they really lead into their specific vision, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I would absolutely say that's a very apt comparison, because The Dark Knight is Nolan really kind of sinking his teeth into these characters, and this is exactly what Batman Returns is. This is what a real Tim Burton Batman movie is, and it's weird and gross and horny, and it's exactly what I want in a Batman movie.
I agree. Although I'm actually kind of at a point, listeners, where I'm starting to think maybe I like Batman Begins more than The Dark Knight, but that's another story. That's another story for another day.
That is spicy.
We'll get to that when we cover the Nolan movies, but well, what I'll say to that is, as a bit of pre-cum, they're both 5-star movies in my book. I think when I think about it now, I'm kind of like, Batman Begins is maybe a better Batman film, and The Dark Knight is maybe a better film overall. I feel like,
I think that's pretty apt, because I mean, I'm not going to tip my hat too early on talking about these, but like, I really do think The Dark Knight is a great movie. Yeah,
it's amazing. Like, I'm not going to fucking be like,
absolutely. I think it's just like, for me, in terms of what I want and what I like in a Batman story, like, I do think the Nolan movies, they do take themselves a little bit too seriously. Especially when you consider The Dark Knight is literally a movie about a man in a rubber bat costume beating up a bloke dressed up as a clown. Give me a bit more weirdness with that. That's what I'm saying. But no, great movie, 5-star movie. I don't want to anger the Nolanites. I've already done that enough in my time.
Well, it's not the Nolanites that you need to worry about these days. It's the Reeves heads.
That's true.
The Nolanites have been...
They're never leaving. No. The Nolanites would actually come after you. The Reeve, whatever.
No, mate, I've seen the Reavers go after people.
Mate, they need to leave their basement before they can come after me.
The Reavers have been going after people, mate. I've seen it happen.
Yeah, I know, because they're doing what the A24 stands do, and it's a whole load of movie discourse that I just can't be.
It's these fucking Gen Z motherfuckers who are like, actually, The Dark Knight was bad and it's probably misogynistic. Like, I'm being glib there, but you know that thing that Gen Z...
it's pretty on point. I mean, obviously we do sound like old man yells at cloud, but
no, there's just a trend that I don't like, where when people look back on an old movie that's like considered a classic, they go, actually it's quite problematic, so it's bad. It's like, shut up, like, by all means analyze that stuff and point it out. I'm not suggesting don't, but like, come on now, like, you're really gonna turn around and be like, The Dark Knight's not a good movie, actually. Like, come on.
Yeah, I always find the argument of people saying that this movie has content that is definitely like unsavory and inappropriate these days,
has
and they
aged
automatically
badly,
say therefore means is bad, is like, that's fucking stupid. That's honestly stupid.
Right, this is a tangent before, but it's a brief one. One of the best ones of these I saw was some what I assume to be Gen Z folks. They're saying they'd never even really seen The Godfather before, right? They were talking about The Godfather and saying all the characters in this are like so misogynist, they're so obsessed with this like toxic idea of masculinity, ergo the movie's bad. And I wanted to be like, sorry, did you think the message of that movie was actually it's pretty great to be The Godfather? Did you think did you watch that and think it was saying you should do this? Because
did you go into that movie about criminals and mob bosses and expect a wholesome progressive message? Is that what you thought?
This is it though. It's not even about because the message is like, this is a bad way to be. Like this this culture of toxic masculinity is bad. It's, okay, nobody in the movie turns around and says that to the camera, but like you're supposed to infer that from the things that happen in the film.
This is not something to aspire to, okay?
Yeah.
This is not something to be celebrated.
I've also seen some interesting takes about The Northman where people think that it's like a white supremacist film that
I also
bolsters
I also want to say that's fucking stupid as well.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the point in The Northman where Alexander Skarsgård turned to the camera and went, "Good movie." Oh, it just went, "Good way to live." It's not even Alex Skarsgård. It's one of the Skarsgårds. I don't know. They're like the Wayans at this point.
Yeah. Northman was pretty good though. I liked the Northman.
It was. None of this is making it into the pod, by the way. Shall we call a break real quick and replenish our drinks and so forth?
Yeah, I'm gonna get myself a quick drink and I'm gonna turn the light on. That's the other thing.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so we move on to Batman Forever, which comes out in 1995,
I want to say.
5. Now, Warner Bros., they want a gentler, more kid-friendly movie that can help them shift merchandise units. So, they called Tim Burton into a meeting to discuss Batman 3. And Burton is there, and this is a story that he tells fairly often. Burton is there giving them ideas, saying, "Oh, I want to do this, I want to do that, or maybe Riddler, maybe get Billy D back for Two-Face, blah, 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 blah." And every suggestion that he makes to the Warner Bros. Execs at the time is met with a response to the effect of, "But wouldn't you rather be doing your smaller movies, or indie movies, more your own thing?" And eventually Burton just goes, "You don't want me to make this movie, do you?" And of course they go, "No, of course we do, of course we do, of course we do." And he just leaves the meeting. So Burton is out of the frame. They go through a few different directors, but they eventually end up at Joel Schumacher. Now, Michael Keaton was willing to come back for Batman Forever, but he says after one meeting with Joel Schumacher that Schumacher just basically didn't get it and kept repeating, "Why does everything have to be so dark? Why does it have to be so dark?" Which Keaton could not relate to. He will kind of say as well that, at the time anyway, because we know he is returning to the DC movie universe soonish. At the time, he was kind of saying he would prefer it to be Burton, but if anyone came with an interesting take, he would be willing to hear them out, sort of thing. But he didn't find Schumacher's vision to be all that relatable to his version of Batman, so he also walks. So, this is kind of the already troubled beginnings of Batman Forever. Then there were many people posited for the role of Batman, blah, 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 but we don't really need to get into that, because we arrive at Val Kilmer, who's taken over the role of Bruce Wayne and Batman. This movie also reintroduces the character of Two-Face, who is no longer played by Billy D. Williams, and is played by Tommy Lee Jones instead.
Yeah.
This is where the notion that these movies are supposed to be kind of in the same continuity starts to fall apart. I mean, we still have Michael Gough, and we still have Pat Hingle as Commissioner Gordon, But
Yeah,
apart
they're very much the sort of paste keeping the wallpapers on the walls at this point, really, isn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of like M and Penny being played by the same actors, even though Bond changes. It's that kind of thing. Yeah, so this movie is a drastic change of pace away from Batman Returns. They are course correcting hard. Not only is it lighter in tone, sillier in tone, almost returning to the tone of the 60s TV show, almost. We get this thing where, there are several different Batsuits, the cars are, the Batmobile's been redesigned, there's all this stuff with, there's all these gadgets and all these different costumes, and it's very transparently designed to sell action figures, this movie.
Yeah, everything's very garish in this film as well. Like, everything looks like an action figure. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Like, I really don't care for the visual style of this film for the most part, at least.
Because Gotham City is now neon drenched.
Yeah, not in a good way, not in like a Nicholas Winding Refn way, or like
no, which would be awesome. Yeah.
No, instead, Gotham City is bad neon and very poor CGI. And yes, I know this was 95. Which means, you can forgive it to a degree. But this is not a particularly visually appealing film, is what I would say. Which is... I think the reason why that stands out to me more is because the two Burton movies are so visually distinct and, like, really quite nice to look at, despite, the more horrific elements. This movie is not a pretty movie to look at. And it sort of pains me to say that, because I remember as a kid, alongside Batman Returns, this was the one that I kind of dug the most.
I liked this one as a kid quite a bit. I mean, I liked both the Schumacher ones as a kid quite a bit. I think returning to it as an adult, you do, especially when you're a bit more versed in the art of cinema. There's definitely... I think one of the things that makes this movie not look all that appealing is the manner in which it's shot. There's so many Dutch angles and everything's kind of... There's no panache to the directing, really. And that's not to slag off Joel Schumacher. I mean, he's someone with a varied career, let's say. But he's made some quite good movies, he made... And, like, I think building up to this, you have things like The Lost Boys, which you kind of see where, his direction there would lead into Batman, perhaps. Obviously, he made Falling Down before this, I think. We did cover this last time.
I believe so.
Yeah, Falling Down's 93, so yeah, it's before this. So in fact, it's the movie he made before this. I think that was his last movie, which is crazy to think about. But and he made like Saint Elmo's Fire and all these other movies. Like he tends towards melodrama. I think it's safe to say like Falling Down is kind of a melodrama as much as it's a black comedy as well.
And I feel like you could apply that to the characters in Batman. But
yeah, I actually think on paper Schumacher makes a lot of sense as a choice for Batman.
Yeah, it's just a shame that pretty much all of the decisions that were made as a result of that are not really the correct ones, if you ask me.
Yeah, and a lot of that, in fairness, is the fault of WB. There is according to myth and legend, there is a cut of this movie which is more in line with Joel Schumacher's original vision. So the whole subplot of Batman being in therapy would have been a much larger part of Bruce Wayne being in therapy, I should say, would have been a much larger part of the movie, and there would have been more of the kind of... you see a little bit of it where he relives his parents' funeral at one point. Yeah. There would have been more of that stuff where it kind of goes into his psyche and you get these flashbacks of his life leading up to him being Batman and stuff like that, which I think would have been kind of a nice contrast, because actually... the sequence where he kind of regresses into his past is kind of shot like a Meatloaf video, but it presents like there's all this kind of flowing linen curtains and this kind of like heavy blue lighting and stuff. But it definitely feels more of a piece with the Burton stuff. And I think having more of that in this movie would have bridged the gap a bit more. And also just like it would have frankly given Val Kilmer more to do.
Because he really gets shafted in this one, I think. It's a shame because a lot of people talk smack about Val Kilmer, but like he's okay as Bruce Wayne. His Batman is pretty on point. Like
I like his Batman. Yeah,
he's kind of, the vocal performance is very much aping Kevin Conroy, I would say.
Yes, who by this time was
just come out. around this time, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's a very similar kind of performance, and I like that. I mean, it's just a shame as Bruce Wayne, he doesn't really get a whole lot to do. He does get paired alongside Nicole Kidman, however.
Yes, as Dr. Chase Meridian, an original character to this movie.
And I feel as if, despite this movie moving away from the Tim Burton films and the inherent darkness, Schumacher kept the horny stuff.
Oh, for sure.
Really, really emphasised that.
Yeah, because this is the movie where nipples start to make an appearance on the Batsuit.
It's true. This is also the first movie where we have the Schumacher montage of when Batman is suiting up and there is a shot of those tight little bat buns.
Yes, you get crotch and ass as Batman.
You get crotch and ass in this movie.
Which you simply would never these days.
Yeah, you just the audacity. And then on top of that, you've got Nicole Kidman as Chase Meridian, who is the horniest character. Like, she, from the word go, is like, I want bat dick. I'm getting bat dick.
Yes.
Watch me go get bat dick.
I mean, she uses the bat light to, the bat signal, I should say, to get Batman to turn up for a booty call, which is frankly outrageous.
But also, fair play to you. Like, she is a woman who knows what she wants, and she knows how to get it. She just turns on that bat symbol and dons some very, very fetching lingerie, and she sets about business, and I respect that.
Yes, she is a terrible psychologist, we should say, because that is just not cricket.
No, it's unethical to the worst degree.
But, yes, as she herself says, there's something about an anatomically correct sculpted rubber suit, which... I think it was Schumacher talking through the characters, to be honest. But but we should briefly run down the plot of this movie, such as it is. So Batman is battling Two-Face in general. Two-Face is already running amok in the city at the start of this movie. Dr. Chase Meridian is brought in to, I guess, help Batman because she's an expert in duality, and Two-Face has a split personality. This is something that obviously draws Bruce to her, because he too has something of a split personality. You see where we're going with this. Unfortunately, as hang on. Edward Nygma is introduced, working for Wayne Enterprises. He's interested in creating mind control devices for reasons that I can't quite remember. Bruce is like, don't do that. That's not a good idea. Edward Nygma, because we should say Edward directly goes to Bruce at the to the chagrin of his director boss. He goes straight to the top, and Bruce is like, no, that sounds bad. Don't do that. Edward Nygma is furious. And we should say played by Jim Carrey. I don't think we've mentioned this yet. It's played furious
to the back rows by Jim Carrey.
Yeah, becomes the Riddler, kills his old boss. Teams up with Two-Face to take Batman down. Along the course of the movie, Two-Face kills young Dick Grayson's parents. Although I say young Dick Grayson, I think, what's he called? Chris O'Donnell? I think he was like 28 when they made this movie.
Yeah, he is full on 13 going on 30 in this movie, isn't he?
Yeah, and then still gets adopted by Bruce Wayne, which is hilarious. Where Bruce is just like, I'm going to adopt this adult man. Who's going to stop me? I'm a billionaire.
Money talks. Give me him.
Yeah, and he finds out through convoluted means that Bruce is Batman, wants to help him. The whole thing comes to a head with, there's an invasion of Wayne Manor by the villains. They take Chase Meridian and eventually... did they take Alfred hostage as well? They must do. Or do they just knock him out?
It's one or the other, really, isn't it?
They knock him out. I can't remember if they take him hostage. Oh, no, they don't, because they kidnap Chase Meridian and they then also... Because at that point, Batman's like, oh, yeah, all right, you can be Robin and join me. Robin then also gets taken hostage at the end. So he has to choose between his sidekick as Batman or his love interest as Bruce, because we should say Edward Nygma creates the weird brain-sucking television device to make himself more intelligent, and he begins to sell it as a product. So he's mainlining the brain waves of everyone in Gotham, which somehow makes him more intelligent. don't worry too much about that.
I just want to go on the record as saying that whole plot line is really dumb.
Yeah, I mean, this movie's pretty dumb in general. Yeah, and anyway, long story short, Two-Face is murdered by Batman, even though Batman was like, "Don't kill Two-Face" to Robin.
Yeah,
he's like, because there's literally a scene where Bruce is like, "I know what it's like for your whole life to become revenge. Don't kill Two-Face, you become just like him." Then at the end of the movie, Batman straight up murders Two-Face.
Yeah,
it's just... which is kind of hilarious. The Riddler gets taken to Arkham Asylum, but luckily for everyone involved, he can't really remember that Bruce Wayne is Batman, and even if he did, he's so insane at this point that no one would believe him anyway. Robin becomes Batman's sidekick on a long-term basis. They both run towards the camera with the bat signal behind them. End of movie. So this movie is a garbled mess.
Yeah, it really is, and I think on the one hand it is kind of enjoyable, but it's also a very frustrating film, I think.
Yeah.
You definitely see shades of what Schumacher was trying to do in the movie. Like you say, that sort of flashback to the funeral is really quite well done. And as I say, we obviously know that there's a supposed extended cut of this film that exists somewhere out there.
Or at least there's somebody... Somebody at WB very recently said there's enough footage to make a cut, essentially. And some of the stuff, there are deleted scenes available that show, on the DVD and stuff, that do show some of the stuff that Schumacher wanted to do in this regard.
Yeah, because there is the probably the most famous deleted scene, which you mentioned to me the last time we attempted to record this, and I've since watched it because I thought it sounded quite interesting, where adult Bruce Wayne is in the cave and a human-sized bat approaches him. That scene's quite cool, actually. It feels a bit more in line with the Burton movies. And I liked it a lot. It's a shame that there's not more of that kind of stuff in the film.
Yeah, the more psychological elements, yeah.
Yeah, instead the film dedicates a lot more of its screen time to Jim Carrey just, piss-arsing about.
Yeah, and we should say, Jim Carrey, I think we're both on the same page here, pretty insufferable in this movie.
Yeah, as a kid, found him really quite enjoyable in this. As an adult, he's very grating, I think.
I mean, he's definitely trying to channel Frank Gorshin from the 60s show, who obviously played the Riddler there, and kind of actually turned the character around, because before that the Riddler was it was definitely a C-tier Batman villain who'd only been in a couple of stories, but then from the popularity of the 60s show and specifically his performance as the Riddler, he became one of the A-tier Gotham villains kind of thing. So he's definitely that definitive performance that Carey is reaching for but not getting at all, because he doesn't seem to grasp what made that performance work was, yes, there's the ham and the over-the-top and all the rest of it, but also he can dial it back and become more sinister and become more threatening. And that thing of, as soon as his ego is questioned, the Gorshin Riddler turns on a dime to being right, fuck it, I'll just kill you then.
It's very much like Nicholson's Joker, isn't it?
Yeah, and it's obviously it's played for laughs in the 60s show for the most part, but there is that character that you could build into a more serious take here. But I think Carey's just more interested in winning the scenes that he's in. He's just
especially when you consider that him and Tommy Lee Jones have quite a famous rivalry on this movie, and a lot of their time together on screen is just spent trying to out-ham one another, and it just becomes really quite exhausting towards the end.
Yeah, and we should say Tommy Lee Jones had beef with Carey from day one, which Carey believes is to do with one of his films, I think Ace Ventura, beating one of Tommy Lee Jones' films at their box office. There is the anecdote that every podcast that discusses this movie touches on, which we'll just touch on now, where supposedly Tommy Lee had just been seething the entire time they'd been working together. And one night he was in a restaurant with his family, and Carey and his entourage came in, and kind of came over, hey Tommy, giving it all that. And apparently Tommy Lee Jones just stood up, embraced Carey in a tight hug, and just said into his ear, I hate you, I truly hate you, I cannot sanction your buffoonery. Which is
your buffoonery.
Which I think is obviously it's one of the immortal lines of showbiz beefery, I think.
like that choice of words, like that speaks volumes. I think like that shows just how much he just wanted to murder Jim Carrey.
And I'll say this: I think Tommy Lee Jones is pretty bad in this movie as well. I think the scenes where he's not with Jim Carrey are better, but as soon as they're put together, they're just trying to one up each other.
Yeah, I think
and not in a fun way.
Yeah, I think Tommy Lee Jones gets some decent bits, especially more towards the beginning when it's just the bit where Batman's trying to foil his robbery attempt. Because like that scene's kind of okay. The action scenes are definitely a step up from the Burton movies because, you know, the sort of fight choreography in the two previous movies was not really that important an aspect for the most part, really. This movie tries to go a little bit bigger in that sense. And Two-Face is kind of okay in that bit. You know, he does the whole sort of duality of madman and sort of sane man fairly well. The main thing I can't get over is I just think his design in this film is ridiculous and looks really, really bad.
They're trying to recreate the like classic comic book Two-Face where he has the kind of weirdly purple skin. So I guess that it's not too like horrific for children to look at. Which, by the way, I respect the big balls on Christopher Nolan for being like, actually, I think Two-Face should be disgusting to look at in the Dark Knight.
Like an actual burn victim.
Yeah. And actually, just fun fact, I know we're not on the Dark Knight podcast, but the version of Two-Face you see in the Dark Knight, that's what they did to tone it down.
Yeah, originally, I've heard about this. I know.
Originally, they had a prosthetic that was like really realistic burn victim stuff, and WB just went, Chris, you absolutely cannot use that. That's revolting. And so he had to be like, well, okay, why don't we use CGI to make it nasty? You know, they just, By the way, get ready for more of that. I don't know why my Christopher Nolan impression is Joanna Lumley, but get ready for more of that in season 2, episode 1.
Brilliant.
Anyway, to round it back to this, his makeup in it's kind of got that thing where the Two-Face side of his face doesn't move that much, so it doesn't look very convincing. And that's the problem with Two-Face is like in a comic book it kind of makes sense, but like in real life it's hard to realize that, I guess.
Yeah, and I think Nolan does a better job of that with his take on the character because it is more realistic and it feels more grounded, I guess.
But also, like, he can move both sides of his mouth, which is kind of essential.
Yeah. I mean, there is some fun stuff with Two-Face in this movie, like how he's got his two sort of mistresses, one of whom is played by Drew Barrymore. Where my favourite scene is where he's about to have dinner and he's got two sides of a dinner table, where one is like, you know, like fancy quail's eggs and shit, and then the other side is like a fucking like full roasted hog or something. I like that scene.
How much is this guy eating though? That's the question. Literally. He's eating 2 meals a day.
And they continue on that motif throughout the rest of the movie. Like, whenever he's got anything like a cigar or like cigarettes, he's always got one in each hand, and he always got like 2 different types of wine and stuff. And I admire that they keep that going throughout the film because that's kind of funny.
Yeah, I kind of wish they'd leaned into it more though. Like, I think if you want a hammy Two-Face, the way you surely go is you have the Harvey Dent side, who's kind of like, no, please, don't hurt people, blah, blah, blah. And then you have the Two-Face side being like, rah, fuck you, I kill people and suck cocks all day. Like, you know, they could have done something with that where he's constantly flipping between the two.
Yeah,
and that could have been...
also opens it up for sort of interesting camera work, because you could frame that really well, which, again, this movie does not seem particularly enamoured with the idea of it looking quite nice. I think it's...
no.
Yeah, it's quite an ugly movie.
Because the thing with Two-Face is he's kind of an interesting character that's been reinterpreted over the years. Obviously, the most famous kind of reinterpretation is the Long Halloween, where you get to see which is kind of what Nolan bases his Two-Face on to some extent. It's like you get to see the descent from Harvey Dent into the Madman, and that one kind of underplays the split personality a little bit, or it plays with it in that and Dark Victory, the sequel to the Long Halloween, where you do get the two sides, but there's always an ambiguity between how much they're actually two sides and how much they're the same person. But he kind of uses the Two-Face persona to justify his actions and that kind of thing. Yeah. And then obviously in the Dark Knight you have Two-Face where it's literally like he's a good guy with a bit of a dark side, and then post accident he's just off the deep end, off the rails on a killing spree. And they don't do the split personality so much. They just do it as like he just embraces the dark side and goes insane.
Yeah.
In this one, I don't really know what the take on Two-Face is.
Well,
it's just kind of like
unlike the Tim Burton movies, we don't really spend a whole lot of time with the villains. I mean, Jim Carrey gets a lot more screen time because we see his his fall and his turn into the Riddler. Whereas at the start of the movie, Tommy Lee Jones just is Two-Face. Like, he's just there already. He's established. There's no explanation or anything. He's just there in full costume, and
they do flashbacks. They have the I say flashback. They have the moment where there's like a news report or something that kind of recaps. Harvey Dent was the district attorney. He gets acid thrown in his face.
I want to flag that up for one reason, because the shot of Bruce Wayne in full Batman regalia leaping over the table,
leaping over the stand is so funny.
So
he was just ridiculous. sat there as Batman the whole time.
I love that. And again, there's little moments of like humor, which I think that must be intentional. Like, that's got to be an intentionally funny gag. I like stuff like that kind of works for me, but overall this movie just has a very bizarre tone that doesn't really scream Batman. I think that's kind of the main problem. This movie doesn't really scream Batman to me. It's like a sort of very compromised version of it. I get that it's trying to maybe ape the 60s series and it's sort of going back to that Silver Age stuff again, but it really doesn't work.
It doesn't work because I don't think Schumacher has a take on the material either way. And like when you hear interviews about his movies, one thing that people always flag up is they say like, when he was making these two movies, he kept saying, "Oh, we're making a comic book," in this kind of dismissive way of like, whenever actors would come to him and be like, "So what's my motivation? All this," he'd kind of be like, "What do you mean motivation? You're a comic book villain. Get on with it," kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
it's all just silly. It doesn't. Nothing matters, is what he's trying to say there.
Yeah, and I think that kind of shines through because like, no one's motivations really make any sense in this movie. And maybe that kind of sounds like a silly thing to say about this kind of film, but like when you go back to what we were saying about Returns, you clearly understand the psychology of all the characters in that film. And it's clearly trying to, as much as it is this outlandish, almost fairy tale-esque setting, you do understand what the characters want, why they're doing what they're doing, why they are the way they are. Whereas in this, you don't really. And,
no.
I mean, I know there would have been more expansion on Bruce Wayne, but like, again, even from what I know of the Schumacher cut, such as it is, the Bruce Wayne in that is very much just like, I'm obsessed with the death of my parents, and I'm not sure if I want to be Batman or not. And it's kind of like, okay, well, we knew that. And so I think, what really lets this film down, because there are fun elements, and certainly compared to Batman and Robin, I think this is actually quite an entertaining film, despite its many, many flaws. I think what kind of stops it from being like a great movie is there is that slight disconnect from the material, either played seriously or played humorously by Schumacher. Because that's one thing I will say, the 60s show very much has a take on the characters, even if it's camp and if it's silly and all the rest of it. Like Adam West God rest his soul, Adam West could have told you why he made all the acting choices he did. And a lot of it is because he thought it'd be funny, but like, he has an idea of what Batman is, even if it's not the idea that we currently subscribe to. And I think that's something that really, in these two Schumacher movies, where they are kind of compared to the 60s show, I think that's where they kind of fall short. Like, the quality of writing isn't there, the understanding of the characters isn't there, and it just kind of becomes action figures slamming against each other,
Yeah, I think the comparisons between the Schumacher movies and the 60s show are very, very surface level. It's just, the Schumacher movies were kind of campy, weren't they? Oh, the 60s show was kind of campy. It's like, the 60s show was camp, but it was more than that. There was a lot more going on beneath the surface. It wasn't just camp for the sake of camp, and it's not just a comic book, as Schumacher would put it.
With all that said, Mark, let's talk about our character rankings for this movie before we breeze on to Bateman and Robine. So, Val Kilmer as Batman.
I think it's, I'm going to give him like a solid 6. I think he's good at Batman. He doesn't really get nearly enough to do as Bruce Wayne, so I think his performance is a bit, like, there isn't really much to grab onto. So, yeah, I'm going to give him a 6.
I think I'm there with you. I think a 6. I think it could have been higher, but what we're left with in this version of the movie just doesn't work for me.
It doesn't really amount to anything, you know. People can say that in Batman Returns, like, you know, Michael Keaton is absent for a fair bit of that movie, but like whenever he is in it, he does actually show up and do something, and you know, he's interesting to watch at least, and he's given good material to work with.
Yeah, agreed. So what about Chris O'Donnell as Robin, the 30-year-old wonder?
It's like a 3 for me. This is not what I think of when I think Robin. It's just really not that character.
No, I think the fact that he is just an adult man makes it so weird to watch. I know maybe there's like, well, there definitely is a convention in 80s and 90s and possibly before that where like teenagers are played by grown-ups who with youthful looks. But I think O'Donnell just like, it doesn't work for me. He's not boyish enough to be Robin. I just don't think it really works.
He's quite wooden as well, I think.
Yeah.
You know.
His acting is piss poor in this.
Yeah, he gets like one
I
or
mean,
two.
it gets worse. It gets worse.
He gets like one or two fun moments. I think the scene where he's like putting away his washing and is doing all the martial arts shit is kind of fun in like a goofy way. But other than that,
I disagree. But there we go.
No, I just like Alfred the entire time. I just look at him like,
Yeah. I think, he's pretty bad. I think I'm going to give him a 4 because I want some space to go lower for the next one.
Chase Meridian is next.
Chase Meridian, I don't even know because the character is she's just a horny therapist, but it's played by Nicole Kidman.
And to be honest, if Nicole Kidman was my horny therapist, I'd be fine with that. So 10. Yeah,
and this is, you know what, this is Nicole Kidman at the height of her smoke show powers, so I'm going to also say 10. And look, these ratings don't have to be based on anything of substance. We just both think Nicole Kidman's fit in this movie. That's what it boils down to.
She's bringing the filth, and what more do you need?
Yeah, quite. So, let's go into the more controversial territory of Jim Carrey's Riddler.
It's like a 4 for me, I think. Like, he gets one or two moments here and there that I like, but it's so overdone. Like, it's amazing to me that there's supposedly this longer cut of this movie that exists where they cut out all the stuff involving Bruce Wayne, because you could shave a good 15 minutes of Riddler out of this movie and you would still have the same movie.
I think I'm tempted to kind of be within the realm of a 3 or a 4 for Riddler, mostly because I find him pretty annoying for the most part. I will also say I've got a bit of beef with this character because it's the one that really popularizes that comic book movie trope of like, why does the villain become the villain? Because they're a little nerdy bitch who the hero rejected, and then they become a villain, which you then see in so many other movies. I mean, you see it in the next fucking Batman movie for a start with Poison Ivy.
Literally.
Although that's not the hero rejecting it, but it's the same character archetype. But you also see it turns up in Iron Man 3 with Aldrich Killian. It turns up with Wonder Woman 1984.
It's got Jamie Foxx in Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Jamie Foxx in Amazing Spider-Man 2. I'm sure there are many other examples that we can point to, but
Megamind.
Megamind, the movie Megamind.
The Incredibles.
Yeah, so I mean, Incredibles is a good example.
That's also
but,
kind of parodying it, I guess.
Yeah, it's aping it. Yeah, so there is that. So I think with all of that, I will say the one scene I do like with Jim Carrey in this movie is where he, as Edward Nygma, is kind of like he's kind of acting like Bruce Wayne because he's trying to sell this new TV that takes your brain and mind fucks you. And like, there's a really nice bit of business that he does where he's dressed like Bruce. He has the same suit and the same glasses as well. And like when Val Kilmer takes his glasses off to gesture, he does the same. He mirrors it. Like it's a nice little scene of like, and that kind of comedy I wish they did more of, where it's subtly done, and it's kind of like it's the physical comedy of Jim Carrey, but it's like it's serving a character purpose where they're showing that like Edward is still very much in the shadow of Bruce Wayne.
Yeah, and I think Carrey is good in that scene as well, where he's sort of sort of doing his mannerisms and stuff. Yeah, that stuff's fine. But overall, the character doesn't really do it for me. His plan is stupid.
Yes, agreed.
He's not really the Riddler. That's kind of the main thing. I don't. Why is it so hard for like filmmakers to get the Riddler right? He's a bloke who just really likes riddles. Like, how do you fuck that up?
Well, I think it's just this thing where there is the definitive Riddler from the '60s show, and they either want to ape it or they want to get away from it. It's kind of the same with the Heath Ledger problem, where it's like they either want to just do exactly that again, or they want to get as far away from it as possible and end up shitting out a Jared Leto. Anyway, Tommy Lee Jones as Harvey Lee Two-Face.
I'm gonna go on brand and give him a 2.
Yeah, I think he could have been great. I think Tommy Lee Jones is good casting for Two-Face, but especially in the age he was in the 90s. But I think he's a 2. The end result is a 2, and also you can't escape the fact that they robbed us of a Billy D. Williams Two-Face.
Yeah, that stings. That really does sting. But it's also the fact that...
And it hurts this movie as well, because if you started this movie with Billy D. just being Two-Face, I think you could get away with it more than what they have here, where it's like, oh yeah, it's Two-Face, don't worry about it. And it's a completely different guy. Whereas if you had Billy D there, you could at least be like, oh right, Harvey Dent from the first movie. I wonder how he got to this state, and like you could do it that way. But
yeah, exactly. No, there'd be more stakes that way, because obviously Bruce Wayne would know him and that kind of thing, and you could play around with that more and whatever. Don't like Two-Face. This movie is really stupid. It looks dumb.
What do we think then in terms of ratings for this movie? Good, but I hate it. Shit, but I like it.
It's verging on shit, but I like it. It's more shit, but if it's on a Sunday afternoon, I might watch it.
I think I'm going to give it a begrudging shit, but I like it, because there's enough about it that I find entertaining that I'll definitely watch it again.
Yeah.
In my lifetime. But, I can't really justify giving it a good.
No.
So... Moving swiftly on to I think the movie we're going to kind of have the least to say about, because it's been talked to death by any other movie podcast. Like if you listen to a bad movie podcast, we're not a bad movie podcast, we're just a movie podcast. But any bad movie podcast will inevitably cover Batman and Robin, and most, it's been talked to death.
Yeah, I mean, it's universally considered one of the worst movies ever made, and I remember going into it for this show, because I hadn't seen it in the longest time. I barely remembered anything, apart from the bit where Chris O'Donnell pulls off his rubber lips. That was stuck in my head for some reason. But I went into it for this and watched it, and thought to myself, do you know what? Maybe it's not as bad as everyone says it is. Maybe time will sort of, be a bit kinder to it. No, it's genuinely that bad. It's fucking awful.
Yeah,
it's really bad.
This is a pretty dreadful movie. I mean, as a kid, I loved this movie. And as I became a man, I became aware that it was bad. But this movie fucking sucks. Let's just quickly run down the plot. So Batman and Robin are now a successful partnership, but there's tension because Robin wants to be seen as a man, despite the fact that he's clearly 32.
And Batman is now George Clooney, but nobody's mentioning that. They're just,
Yeah. Yes, he is indeed. Mr. Freeze is running amok, played by Arnold Schwarzenegger. I guess what is he doing in this movie? He's like stealing diamonds?
Yeah, he wants
at the start.
Yeah, because it's the whole Mr.
It's something to do with right. You know the whole thing. He's got his wife in a tube, and he wants to create a cure, and for some reason, diamonds are the answer to this. Don't worry about it. Along the way, Uma Thurman as Pamela Isley runs afoul of her mad boss, who is the Dr. Woodrow, of the villain from Swamp Thing, which is kind of a weird pull. But I'm glad they were like, that's actually a weird DC thing that they were like, oh yeah, there's that. It's kind of like how in the first movie. Just a side note. Vicky Vale says that she's been taking photos in the war photos in the Corto Maltese, which is not a real place and only exists in the DC universe. But I enjoy the fact that there are these, even in these early movies where no one gave a shit about comic books, there are the occasional wink to comic book continuity.
One of these movies also references Metropolis as well, doesn't it? I can't remember which one it is.
Yes. That is in Batman Forever. He says the circus will be halfway to Metropolis by now.
Yeah.
And in this movie, he says, this is why Superman works alone.
Yes, of course, he does mention Superman by now. Yeah, this movie has a lot more very overt, not like winking at the audience, more just kind of staring deadpan at the audience.
Yeah. So yes, to round off the plot, she gets turned into Poison Ivy because her boss is trying to make criminals stronger, ?
And in the course of doing so, creates Bane.
Yes, because he takes a scrawny death row inmate and turns him into Bane. Not Burn, but just Bane.
The superior live-action version of Bane.
Absolutely criminal opinion. Not even criminal, sex criminal. That's how low you are for even suggesting that could be the case.
I mean, I'll stand by it. Why not? I don't know. You know, Tom Hardy's Bane doesn't shake his arms in the air like Wallace from Wallace and Gromit and shout Bane, so therefore he is inferior, in my opinion.
Yes, but he does crash this plane with no survivors. Anyway, stop it. You know what will happen. I'll just start doing Bane.
You
quotes.
will, and I can't. I've got no time for it.
He does. That's why you always.
No, I've got no time for it, mate. We're running long. Come on, get through Batman and Robin.
Anyway, through long, convoluted means, Poison Ivy tries to drive a wedge between Batman and Robin by seducing both of them with her Poison Ivy pheromones. She eventually teams up with Mr. Freeze because she wants to give plants the chance to rule the world, and she feels that Mr. Freeze will be able to help her with this because he could freeze the entire world, and so that then they could start a new age.
Because that's completely conducive to plant life growing, but okay.
And the reason that Mr. Freeze goes along with this is because he's gone mad from what he thinks is the death of Nora, because Poison Ivy, unbeknownst to him, unplugged the machine that keeps Nora alive in her frozen state, and blamed it on Batman. Meanwhile, Alfred is dying of cancer AIDS. No, he's dying of the same thing that Freeze's wife has, but a lesser form that Mr. Freeze we know has already
less
cured
deadly
from his
cancer
journals.
AIDS. Yeah.
Yeah, he's type 1 cancer AIDS, not type 2.
Yeah.
Anyways, there's a whole convoluted thing where Batman realizes that Mr. Freeze has already cured type 1 cancer AIDS by... Don't worry about it. So, but it leads to the subplot where Alfred... The only emotional subplot in this movie, where Alfred is kind of dying and Bruce is having to deal with that fact. Meanwhile, to come and help Alfred, I guess, in his state, his niece turns up. So actually, confirmed Alfred is a member of the Legion of Uncles, this movie does. His niece turns up, who is Alicia Silverstone / Barbara / Batgirl. She's not Barbara Gordon.
No.
I guess she's just Barbara Pennyworth, I suppose. But, so that's weird. Because traditionally, as I'm sure the listeners know, the first Batgirl is Barbara Gordon, Lieutenant Gordon's... Oh, sorry, Lieutenant Gordon. He gets promoted. Commissioner Gordon. His daughter. So, Alicia Silverstone, Batgirl, she comes along, isn't really relevant to the plot, has some unconvincing sexual tension with Robin, gets... when it looks like Alfred's about to pop his clogs, she finds that he's secretly made a bat suit for her, and she's like, oh, turns out Alfred is the butler to Batman and Robin. Cool, I guess I'm also a superhero now. She comes to save Batman and Robin from Poison Ivy, who they weren't doing too badly against anyway, from what I remember. Because the subplot of Robin lusting after Ivy and Batman supposedly being jealous resolves by Robin wearing the famous rubber lips so that Ivy's poison kiss can't kill him. But when she thinks that she's killed him with the poison lips, she's like, ha 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 ha, you stupid bitch. I was always going to kill you, you little shit bitch. And then Robin's like, ha, fuck you, dickhead. And there's a big fight involving Mr. Freeze, Ivy, Batman, Robin, and Batgirl. Mr. Freeze kind of freezes Gotham, but then they thaw it out through the positioning of satellites at the end. I don't fucking know.
Ridiculous, this movie.
And then the movie just fucking ends. Who fucking cares?
It's crap. It's crap. Okay, it's actual crap. And it's the thing, with a plot that outlandish, you would assume it'd at least be somewhat entertaining to watch. But this movie is weirdly boring.
It's a slog.
Yeah, it
is a slog.
Boring.
I mean, we thought the directing in the last movie was kind of laissez-faire. This movie is barely directed.
It's as flat as a witch's tit, which is incredible when you've got, Arnold Schwarzenegger dressed, like, cosplaying as Dr. Manhattan making ice puns. Well, all puns. Like, every line of dialogue he has in this movie is a pun, and I don't understand why.
Yeah, it's ice to meet you. Let's kick some ice. Everybody chill.
What killed the
it's
dinosaurs?
Just,
the Ice Age. Like,
the Ice Age,
which is probably my favourite of all the shit puns.
I mean, it's the most laboured because it relies on the fact that there is a dinosaur.
That's true.
In the museum.
Yeah, like he had to work for that one. One thing I will point out, just because I've got the Batman and Robin wiki open here on my screen alongside your glorious mug, I will also say the Batman and Robin wiki is more interesting to read than watching this fucking awful movie.
That checks out.
Yeah, it's actually, I'll just read the wiki. I'd say listen to this podcast, read the wiki, you'll have a much better time. I've actually got here the whole thing about Barbara and Batgirl. So it says here, unlike the comics, this Batgirl is not related to Commissioner Gordon. This decision was because Pat Hingle was thought to be too old to realistically portray her father.
Right, sure. Okay.
Makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, it makes a certain amount of sense, I guess. Could have been his adopted daughter. There could have been stuff, you know. I don't know why they need to go for the laboured thing of it's Alfred's wayward niece.
Who's into drag racing, which ultimately amounts
to... Who, by the way... well, it's just to show she's got a dangerous side. Because when she's introduced, she's like a preppy Oxbridge. And yes, they say Oxbridge. Yeah. As if that's a single university. Oxbridge University is where Barbara goes. Which, again, it's the kind of thing where, like... That is sort of a joke. But in a movie this dumb, it's kind of like, is that on purpose, or is that like, did they just not bother to look it up? Like, because if that was in the 60s show, I would assume that was like an actual joke, where they're like playing on the idea of, for any listeners who may be unaware or American, the two big universities, what you would call Ivy League in the States here, Oxford and Cambridge, we often refer to the types who go there as Oxbridge types, collectively, as one. But it would be weird to be like, I go to Oxbridge. Yeah. That would be weird. You would either say Oxford or Cambridge. Yeah. So I think it's a joke, but I don't know. Anyway, you talk some more opinions whilst I get up my notes about what I can only describe as the Coolio conspiracy.
Please do, because again, that is also more interesting than this movie.
Than the movie itself.
If I have to praise anything about the film, I actually think Uma Thurman's performance is treading the line of what this movie is. She actually kind of gives it a little bit of life. There's parts where she definitely doesn't, don't get me wrong. Like, she's not fantastic throughout the entire movie.
Yeah.
But there's bits that I kind of like her, and she's kind of fun.
Yeah, I think she's kind of more dialed into the tone than a lot of the other actors, because George Clooney looks bored for most of this movie.
Yeah, he's like comatose. He sleepwalks this entire movie.
He's such a nothing. He's such a nothing in this.
Chris O'Donnell is just bad in this movie. He's just
in fairness to the bloke, his main outing as Robin, this movie, he has to be bratty at the start when he's being like, I'm in a car, chick the car, me. And then the rest of the movie, he's like enthralled to Ivy and like just raging at Bruce for not letting him be the big man. It's just like, this is such an annoying take on Robin. And it's kind of the thing where I get where they're coming from, because in the comics, it's kind of traditional that there is tension between Batman and Robin, especially in the kind of post-70s, 80s interpretation of the character, where it goes back to the slightly darker tone. Like, Dick Grayson and Bruce Wayne have a complicated relationship that is part of their appeal. But in this movie, they reduce that down. Because this is the thing. Obviously, Robin's supposed to be like 12, 13 when Batman first adopts him. So the idea is like Bruce becomes a father figure to him, but obviously a difficult father figure because he's also a psychotic vigilante who trains him to be a child soldier. Yeah,
he likes to dress like a giant rodent and beat people up. I don't feel like social services would allow him to have a child.
But this movie kind of feels like too... Yeah, he's a billionaire, that's what you can do.
Exactly.
This movie kind of feels like two roommates who hate each other. That's the vibe I get from these guys.
Yeah.
Like, it's not even... Like, Schumacher, he kind of leans into the homoeroticism, but they're not even gay in this movie. They just hate each other. It's not even that's one thing you could do with a...
What you're saying.
there's Mark's opinions do not necessarily reflect the opinions of Kino and Inferno. many straight couples get along with each other perfectly well, so long as they're under the age of 60. Yeah.
Or simply just engaged, not married.
Well, the section's getting removed. The point is this. I think you could do a decent version of Robin where he is like in his late 20s and Bruce is kind of middle-aged. That could be interesting. It's not the typical thing, but like I think the way you'd have to do it is, I mean, and especially if you're kind of leaning into this camp of it all, I think the way you do it is they're more like, to build on what you were just saying, they're more like an old married couple, I think would be the way to go, where it's kind of like they have their banter and their bickering, but underneath it all, they're solid as a rock.
There's an element of trust between them. They they murdered that guy together.
Considering this movie's called Batman and Robin, they hate each other.
Yeah.
Like, as I was watching this, I was just kind of thinking, like, why do they hang out? Like, what the fuck? Especially because he's an adult. There's no element like he has to stay there because he's a kid. It's like
he could
just
leave. He's in his 30s. He shouldn't be freeloading off this man.
Yeah. I mean, I prefer the father-son interpretation of Bruce and Robin.
I agree.
But that's just me. So, before we get into character rankings and round this puppy up for the final time, hopefully, you may have noticed, Mark, that in the drag racing scene, the aforementioned drag racing scene, a certain gentleman from the 90s and from the Gangster's Paradise, a certain gentleman named...
Life, yes.
He's been spending most of his life in that Gangster's Paradise. And even his mama thinks his mind is gone. But we are, of course, talking about Coolio.
Remember Coolio?
Former...
Nobody does. No, I'm kidding.
Well, if they watched Celebrity Big Brother about 10 years ago...
Oh, he was, wasn't he?
Yes. And, of course, as we alluded to, he was kind of a one-hit wonder with the Gangster's Paradise. Well, he's a one-hit wonder in this country. I don't know if he was bigger in the States. It's hard to know.
Yeah, that's it.
But,
that's only Gangster's Paradise. That's all anybody knows about this man.
Yeah, and he has been spending most of his life. Gangster's Paradise. Also, Michelle Pfeiffer's in the video for that, so I'm not sure what that's about. Oh, yeah, because it's part of the soundtrack for whatever movie that is. She's...
Dangerous Minds? Something like that?
I think it is Dangerous Minds.
I've never seen it.
I can't be bothered to look it up. No, I haven't either. Just an interesting Batman connection. But anyway, Coolio was in this movie as the kind of dude who I guess has organised this drag race. I'm not entirely clear. Now, there is a rumour that has circulated for years that this cameo was as lead-in for him to play the Scarecrow in the cancelled fifth instalment that would have also been directed by Joel Schumacher, which was called Batman Unchained. Now, Schumacher has only ever talked about how he wanted Nicolas Cage for the role of Jonathan Crane / Scarecrow, which I think we can all agree would have been fantastic.
100%.
However, this thing about Coolio has existed in the fan community for a while. I'm not entirely sure where it's come from, because even if you go on the Wikipedia now for like unrealised Batman projects, you will see in Batman Unchained that it says Joel Schumacher considered Nicolas Cage for the part before ultimately settling on rapper Coolio, with no real citation. Now, I did a little bit of digging, and it seems that the source of this rumour is Coolio himself.
Of course it is.
So I found an excerpt from, I can't remember where I got this article because we originally looked for this
great.
Like 4 weeks ago and I didn't write it down. But I'm just going to read you this brief excerpt of an article on the subject. So, Coolio appeared briefly to oversee a street race featuring Barbara, Alicia Silverstone, a role that seemed a little small and random at the time. But, in a rather hard-to-hear interview that took place at a bar and grill in Texas, so just bear that in mind, Coolio said he only agreed to appear in Batman and Robin because it was to lead to a larger role. And now we're quoting Coolio. The only reason I did that part was because they promised me the villain part in the following Batman, which they didn't do because Joel Schumacher, they fired him. Me and him didn't get along that great anyway. The next Batman, the villain was supposed to be the Scarecrow. So, there you go. Coolio seems to be the source of this rumour. I don't know why he's being interviewed in Texas bar and grills.
But also, I mean, why would he lie? Why would he lie?
Why would he lie? So, Mark, that's the Coolio conspiracy. Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what the deal is there. I mean, Coolio claims, obviously, that he was told he'd be playing Scarecrow in the next movie, but if Schumacher was considering Nicolas Cage, I find that hard to believe.
Yeah, I feel like maybe Coolio was just having a cameo in this movie. Was he on the record label, do you think? That
Oh, almost certainly, almost certainly.
And they probably just got him in it for that reason and said, like, yeah, you could be in the next one. Yeah, don't worry about it. Expecting him to just, like, never call back or something.
Yeah.
But
so
we got sidetracked there with the Coolio conspiracy. We've definitely not talked about this one as much as we have the other ones, but there's one reason for that, and it's because it's fucking shit. And it doesn't really warrant that much discussion.
So let's conclude. Quick character rankings. Clooney Batman.
It's like a 2. Like, it doesn't really do anything.
Yeah, he's a 2.
Yeah.
I mean, the only scene I really like of him as Bruce is when, Alfred's dying. And they have that exchange where he says, like, I love you, old man. That's nice. That's nicely delivered. The rest of the movie, absolute cack. He seems embarrassed to be in the bat suit. Like, he's not leaning into the camp is the thing. Like, he seems like he's embarrassed to be there.
George Clooney spends this entire movie just daydreaming about the holiday home he's going to buy with the salary he got for this movie. That's kind of it.
Quite.
That's all it is. It's not very good at all.
Chris O'Donnell, Robin?
1.
Yeah, I'm going to give him a 0.5.
Yeah, he's annoying in this movie.
A 0.5.
Just really irritating. Not a good performance. I don't buy him as I didn't buy him as Robin in the last movie, so why should I buy him in this one when he's just being a whiny little dickhead? I'm not about it.
Agreed.
Terrible.
Okay, moving on. Arnie as Mr. Freeze.
Arnie is at least having fun.
Yeah.
But I don't find his character particularly compelling, especially because Mr. Freeze is actually one of the more well-written Batman villains in terms of, like, the sort of humanity and stuff. I know that you're a big fan of Freeze.
I like Freeze. They've yet to... Well, the 60s version of him and the animated series version of him are great, but they've yet to do a movie version of him that's any good. Matt Reeves, come on, give us Freeze in the next movie. Don't be a pussy. Yeah, I've got to echo your thoughts. For me, Arnie's having a good time, which raises it above a 0. It's a 2 for me.
Yeah. It's about a 2-3 for me. It's just it's such a misguided performance. Like, it doesn't match everything else that's going on.
Yeah.
And also, like, no disrespect to Arnie, because we love Arnie on this show. You guys know we do. But after the 3rd or 4th ice pun, even he's getting sick of it. He puts less and less effort into his puns after a while, and it really shows. Sorry guys.
Okay, what do we think of? Yeah, what do we think of Uma Thurman as Poison Ivy? I don't think we need to expand on what we've said.
No.
5 for me.
It's like a 5 for me. Yeah, she's one of the only real saving graces. I think, and I can never remember the actor's name, but the guy who plays the doctor who kills her.
Oh yeah, I can't remember.
I mostly know because he plays Clamp in Gremlins 2. That's the main thing that I know.
Yeah,
he's also in The Mouth of Madness as well. He's a great actor. Yes. He's fantastic. Should have been in the movie more.
Yeah, he's great. I'm going to give him a strong 10.
Yeah, absolutely.
His one scene is hilarious. He absolutely knows the right tone to go for. I think Uma's going to have to be a 5 because she's making the best of what she's got as Poison Ivy. But also, I think the problem is, as we alluded to in the Phantom episode, weirdly, Joel Schumacher is a very, very gay middle-aged man at this point, and he doesn't know how to make a woman sexy. So what he ends up at here is drag queen ? And I just think it doesn't work. I mean, it could be fun in its own way, but the whole thing they're trying to do here is like Batman and Robin are both sort of fighting over her. They're trying to do the Catwoman thing, where she's like the evil one, but maybe there's the redemption, and maybe I like that she's bad, and blah blah blah. But because it's not written as well as that, it just comes across very like, what do these guys see in her exactly? Like, it's a shame because, like, I think Uma Thurman could have really done that role well if it was just written with slightly more nuance and slightly less, well, let's face it, slightly less camp.
I think another thing as well is, like, this movie looks very cheap generally, but her Poison Ivy costume looks like a bad cosplay. Like, it's It's
Yeah.
terrible. It's really, really terrible.
It is shit.
Um,
So with that, let's round this off with Alicia Silverstone as Batgirl.
it's like a 2. She doesn't really add much of anything to the movie.
Yeah, she's a 2. She doesn't drag it down too much, but then when she is Batgirl, she's really annoying. Because they immediately do the same thing they do with Robin, where it's like, oh, we've got to bicker the whole time. That makes us fun. And it's like, no,
because that's what families
shit.
do. Oh, fuck right off.
Oh, and also when she beats up Poison Ivy at the end, because only a woman can beat up a woman.
Yeah, that was my thoughts watching this. I was just like, we couldn't really have George Clooney slapping Uma Thurman about, could we?
But then they have, but as we know from Batman the Brave and the Bold, if anyone's seen that cartoon, the Hammers of Justice are unisex. But that's a great show if anyone's seen that,
I've seen bits of that, and I've always really enjoyed it.
So anyway, but also the thing in that scene where she beats up Poison Ivy, she has this stupid line about like trading on your looks and man, you're not very feminist, bro. Read a book, and it's like, shut up. And then she's just arguing with, and she's just like bickering with Robin the whole time, where he's like, "How do you know how to do that, little girl?" And he's like, "Fuck off, little boy." And then there's the bit where they like fall off the building, and he's like, "I got you," and then he doesn't, and then she catches him, and she's like, "No."
It's a load of old horse shit, isn't it? It's just a load of old horse shit.
It's terrible.
I know a lot of people have some serious nostalgia for this movie, and if you do like this movie, like that's fine. Like, more my power to you. Enjoy it as much as you want. I personally just found this movie to be a fucking slog to get through.
Yeah, it's just not good. It's not even fun in the way that like Batman Forever kind of is, where it's on the right a line of being dumb that you can enjoy it. This to me was just like feeling my brain melt slowly out of my ears.
Yeah.
I will say we need to go back. We need to take the pin out of Michael Gough that we put in earlier. I think for his service to this franchise, he's like a 15 out of 10.
Yeah, absolutely.
He's amazing.
Like, even when
he's great in all these movies.
Went to shit, he still stuck around and did his best Alfred, and we have to commend him for that.
And he's actually unironically great in this movie, in Batman and Robin. He doesn't have much to do other than die, and then not die, but he serves his purpose well. He does the role well. He lends it some genuine human emotion in amongst all the cod pieces and leather nipples and all the rest of it.
Yeah. So that was.
Well, hang on. What are we saying for the rating? Are we saying Batastic?
Okay,
Jokerific?
We'll redo that.
No, we won't. We'll keep going because let's just finish this. It's going to be. Is it Batastic? Jokerific? Nipple on Batsuit? Alfred?
I'm gonna go for a different one. I'm going to go with it's batshit, but not in a good way.
Yeah, it's batshit. It's
batshit
in a bad way. I think going by our classic rating, I think we're both just saying unequivocally shit.
Yeah, it's shit. It's bad. It's so bad. I really did go into this expecting to maybe think, there's going to be some stuff in this that I can enjoy and maybe think that it's, not as bad as everyone says it is, but it really is as bad as everybody says it is. But again, some people love this movie, and if you love it, all my power to you, but it's shit. It's really shit.
Right. Well, that's been Aidan and Marc versus Batman for kind of the third time that we've recorded it. Hopefully it was coherent and we didn't sound too much like we wanted to kill ourselves. Let us know in the comment. What I will say is, you can find us on YouTube at Kino Inferno. You can find us on Spotify, also at Kino Inferno. You can find us on Twitter at Kino_Inferno.
That's the important bit.
Some other cunt got to Kino Inferno before we did.
We are suing.
We're trying to arrange to have them killed.
The legal advice bearer is shaking his head.
Stitcher, forget about it. We're not on Stitcher. Don't know what it is. We're on some other podcatchers, I think, just by virtue of being with Podbean. But I don't know what they are, and you certainly don't use them. So that's that. Season 2, coming soon. If you're on the Facebook page, we're going to be releasing episode titles soon.
Yep.
So we'll be starting the promotional hype for that.
So we will be teasing your nipples with Season 2 soon. We finally cleared it by the lawyers.
Yes, we don't have a release date yet, but we will soon. Obviously, the fact that we've just had to re-record this has set us back a little bit.
Just a little bit.
But yeah. But that's that.
It's in the oven.
So,
it's baking
get
away.
ready for that. Next time you hear from us, it will be Season 2, Episode 1. So, all that remains to be said is I've been Aidan.
And I've been Marc.
And I've been the Joker, baby! Woo! I'm crazy!
Love that Joker.
I guess you're only familiar with the new Batman movies. Michelle Pfeiffer. Ha. The only true Catwoman is Julie Newmar, Lee Merriweather, or Eartha Kitt. And I didn't need molded plastic to improve my physique. Pure West. And how come Batman doesn't dance anymore? Remember the Bat-2-C? Yo, hey, yeah, yeah.
Nice meeting you. Just keep moving. Don't make eye contact.